Meet Siamtanda, Casey, and Lirado. They're building impactful businesses by partnering with E Squared. E Squared is part of the broader group of Alan Gray Philanthropies, focusing on impact investing. We work alongside Alan Gray Fellows, social entrepreneurs, and high-growth business owners, people who start or grow businesses that drive commercial and social returns. We provide entrepreneur-friendly patient capital to businesses from pre-seed to mature stages. We also provide end-to-end business support through post-investment assistance programs. We partner with startups, incubators, accelerators, and investors, and capture and nurture entrepreneurial talent, generating financial and social returns across all sectors. Partnering for growth, we take a longer-term investment view, understanding that businesses and entrepreneurs need time to develop. By investing in responsible and ethical commercial entrepreneurs like Siamtanda and Lirado, and social entrepreneurs like Casey, we support enterprises that attack poverty, generate business value, and drive job creation. Follow E Squared.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto stage your MC for today, Tamala Manda and Timothy Page.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to ask if we could just settle down. I know we're all excited on a Saturday morning. Good morning, like I said, but I felt like I was reprimanding you guys. As a kid, I am reprimanding my parents, so forgive me. But sometimes the kids will reprimand the parents. So this morning, we are delighted to be your MCs. So like the video already said, I am Tamala Manda, and on my side, I have my colleague, Mr. Timothy. So today, you are probably asking yourself why we are here. Does anybody know why we're here? Well, I know I'm here because I'm employed by E Squared, so I kind of have to be here. But anyway, for those of you who do not know, I'm going to help you. So today, we are gathered under the banner of Momentum, Broadening Horizons, Optimizing Impacts. And that's a lot of English, guys. And as the day unfolds, we will make it a point that you understand exactly why we are here. The theme reflects not just the direction of movement, but the powerful force, a force that propels us forward, that expands our perspective, and that compels us to seek not just change, but meaningful, positive transformation.
Thank you, Tamala. The seminar is not just about what happens on the stage today. It's also about the connections we forge, the ideas we share, and the momentum we build collectively. So we encourage you to not just be participants, but to be, not to be spectators, but to be participants, and engage in conversations, challenge assumptions, share insights, and that will propel our endeavors collectively. But first things first, I'll just like to run through a couple of house rules. We'd start by saying, or I'd ask everybody to say hello to the person next to them. Some of you came together, but still, say hello. Hi, Tamala. That's nice. I like this. Okay, so we've all greeted each other. I see Sipo's greeting everybody.
The friendliest, yeah.
We'd like to acknowledge the E Squared, members of the E Squared Board of Trustees, the E Squared team and talent, members of the Alan Gray Fellows Association Executive, members of the fellow community at large, and our guest speakers that we have today. We'd also like to acknowledge those that are streaming online, and we'd like to thank everybody that's in the room for coming today. So today's all about conversation and knowledge transfer, but please bring your best self to the conversation, and please be prepared to share knowledge, ask questions, connect, and provide feedback. I'd like to welcome or start off our day today by welcoming our CEO, Mr. Gladwin Liu, who's going to start off by setting the scene for us. So, Mr. G, stage is yours, sir.
yeah, feels like the energy is a little bit low. So maybe what we'll do, like you in church, can you high five your neighbor? Everybody seems to be sitting so far back, and I, hey, the couch is too comfy. Yeah. Where were these? Like I said, if I continue on the church analogy, where were these when I was in church? You know what I mean? I used to use my grandmother's lap as a. But can I ask that? I know you guys are comfortable, but can we move closer? We've got some speakers. We want you to engage. You seem very far away right now, so can we move a little bit closer? Relocate yourselves, please. There's no golden circle, so these seats in the front are available. That's sit down, bro. I'll sit next to you. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm pretty sure throughout the day there'll be more people coming through. We had 93 RSVPs, and thank you for all 10 of you for arriving on time. So yeah, man, I'm really excited and would want to welcome all of you for joining us this morning for our annual seminar. I'm assuming that there's quite a few people joining online as well. I think I'm going to apply the tactic that Ludwig gave me. Where's Ludwig sitting now? There. He says we need to be sending out invoices to everybody that RSVP'd and didn't arrive. So if you're listening, please expect a WhatsApp invoice for your attendance. I wish I'd done that for my wedding, you know? Anyways, welcome to, I know Ntebu hasn't arrived yet, but the Board of Trustees, the Alan Gray Fellow, Group of Philanthropy, some of the guys are going to be joining us today. Alan Gray Fellows, part of the association, E-Squared Talent, and all of our valued industry partners and stakeholders. Thank you for taking this time on a family day to join us while we engage. Today we gather under the banner Momentum, Broadening Horizons, and Optimizing Impact. Like Tamala said, that's a lot of English. And a theme that encapsulates all of our shared vision for creating a lasting and meaningful change in the entrepreneurial investment ecosystem on the African continent. Our founder, Dr. Gray, once said, responsible entrepreneurship is not about creating businesses that benefit only the shareholders, but the employees, the customers, the community, and the environment. Dr. Gray believed that entrepreneurs have the unique opportunity to make a positive impact on the world. And he envisioned E-Squared as a catalyst for responsible entrepreneurship on the continent. Today, we continue to uphold his legacy by investing in and supporting entrepreneurs who are building businesses that are both profitable and sustainable. We believe that responsible entrepreneurship is the key to unlocking Africa's economic potential and creating a better future for us all. Our agenda today is meticulously crafted to provide you with insights, strategies, and connections you need to succeed in the rapidly changing landscape. We will explore the drivers of Africa's innovation and investment landscape, and I'm so excited to have Anthony and David come and chat to you. They're going to be helping us with our strategy, so please engage with them as you go forward. Optimizing of the investment ecosystem and partnerships and collaboration. I'm so happy to see Nivesh from Norscan. He's going to be joining us on stage. Bakang, thank you guys for making the time. And you know, if you are an entrepreneur raising capital, please make time to speak to some of the investors in the room. It's only together as we crowd in capital, as businesses continue to grow, that we're going to be able to make a dent and get more businesses funded. The importance of prioritizing women-focused funding and investment support. So we, as a team, have prioritized supporting women-led businesses in this next phase of our growth. We believe that a lot more can be done, whether that is deselecting, whether that is lack of funding, whether that is the structure of fund managers, whether that is just a lack of support within the space. We're trying to tackle it all. And so we encourage you to engage on those platforms and lend your voices so that we can create products that will serve you, the fellows, the best. And then also we're going to have a closer look at our investee companies. And so we've invited some of the businesses that has received funding from E-Squared in the last 12 to 18 months to join us on stage. It's the lesser spotted investee from E-Squared. So engage with them so that you can get some advice on how to get through some of our investment criteria and then eventually get to our IC. It's quite an involved process, and we really try to walk the journey with all of our investee companies. And so with that, I'm going to say that our objectives are clear: to encourage entrepreneurs to harness collective expertise, to explore key areas of collaboration, to develop innovative strategies, and to champion the creation of an interconnected entrepreneurial ecosystem. Our panelists will share real-world examples, discuss challenges, and provide advice to drive sustainable growth within the entrepreneurial landscape. So each panel discussion is designed to offer profound insights, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that will leave an indelible mark on our collective pursuit of impactful change. In conclusion, I encourage each of you to actively participate, engage, and contribute to the discussion throughout the day. Together, let's seize the momentum, broaden our horizons, and optimize the impact of our collective endeavors. Thank you, and let's make this day a stepping stone towards a brighter and prosperous future for our entrepreneurial ecosystem. Thanks, guys.
Okay, and my voice is already quite loud, so I wasn't too worried about people being able to hear me. As Gladwin says, my name is David Saunders. I work for an organization called Brighter Bridges. I think similarly to how you guys are hoping for a brighter future, the name of our company comes because we are trying to profile the brighter side of innovation across emerging markets, and particularly in Africa. And as we started on this journey, we obviously found a lot of innovators, a lot of investment happening. And with that came a lot more data and information about what was happening within the ecosystem as well. So we are a data and intelligence firm. We capture deal flow data that really tracks all types of funding into the innovation ecosystem across Africa. And we basically use that data to generate intelligence and insights that we can support different types of investors and funders with. And I'm joined today by Anthony William Catt, who works for a partner of Brighter Bridges called Ventures 54. And together, we basically provide like the research and data and intelligence supports to DFIs, investors, different types of ecosystem support organizations. And then Anthony actually does the hard work. He translates that into technical assistance programs, working with investors and startups across the continent, helping them to both raise funding, because as you'll see in this presentation just now, it's not just startups for which we're feeling the pressure, but investors as well. And then also helps them with, helping to work through their business models, provide them with the support they need as they're going on their entrepreneurial journey. So when Gladwin reached out to me, this is actually the third time I presented to the E-Squared team, so I'm sorry, we have changed the presentation up a bit. The first two times the audience was really the board and then the E-Squared team, and today he asked us to focus more on the fellows, so that's why I called Anthony and said, you're the one that really understands how this data and information is playing out in the ecosystem, and what you're hearing in terms of how it's affecting things like fundraising periods, what you need to present to different types of investors, et cetera. So I'll provide the start of my presentation is really like the data and intelligence, and provides like an overview of what we're seeing both in Africa as well as in South Africa specifically. And then I'm going to hold over to Anthony, and he's going to help translate that just into some practical implications. And before I start, Can I just get a few volunteers to raise their hand and tell me how the last 12, 18 months has been? Maybe on the startup side, maybe on the investor side, maybe on the support side. Because obviously from Brighter and what we've heard in the ecosystem is that it hasn't been the easiest time as well. So I'm not sure if I can ask anybody that's maybe raised in the last 12 to 18 months, if one of those portfolio companies was here, how that was, or somebody that's looking to raise and has been reaching out to investors and how that experience has been. I will just randomly call on people as well, so. Yes, the man with the sunglasses sunglasses on. It's all right. I forgot my glasses at one event in Nairobi, and I had to wear my sunglasses to judge an ag tech competition. So I wasn't doing it as on purpose as you are right now, but I don't think I'm as cool as you either.
Nah, I'm just trying to have a chill Saturday, to be quite honest. But yeah, I guess with respect to how the capital raising process has been over the last 12 months for us as a business, we run a business called Sultana Capital. So we're a working capital finance fund that effectively finances informal traders within South Africa. Sure, it's obviously been tough over and beyond the fact that like lending to township or rural entrepreneurs is really not a space that traditional capital want to deploy their money into. And I guess being able to communicate that story in a way that finally lands with traditional capital, it was quite a journey. And I think the second component of it, being a business who mostly requires debt to grow, the inventory I sell is money. It's also been very interesting to see how the formal financial market also struggles to understand the opportunities that sit within that space, but shout out to E Squared. They saw the vision early. So yeah, but all in all, it has been a challenging process. It was definitely not all roses. Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine to some extent as well, with the last like 12 to 18 months being how it's been, that you've had to knock on a few more doors. Nivesh, just because I saw you come in, what's it been? Yeah, you're going to get called on. What's it been like from your perspective in terms of from raising your fund as well as they just closed at 205 million, Norskin did, right? Yeah, just closed $205 million fund. But how has the kind of process been over the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, thanks for singling me out. Wasn't prepared. But yeah, it's very similar to, I'm assuming, a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. A lot of people forget that funds are also startups. And we've been going through this fundraising journey for the last 24 months. And the last 12 months particularly been yeah, it's working now. Similar to the tech, it's been pretty difficult for us the last 12 months. So raising this fund has been extremely difficult. It's taken us 2 to 3 times longer. A lot of sweat, blood, and tears that has gone into it, and that I guess is just because the market is risk off, right? And especially from an African perspective, if you're an African founder, if you're an African fund, if you're an African entrepreneur support organization, it just is a million times more difficult. But let's hope over the next 6 to 12 months, things become a bit easier.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to share. Otherwise, I'll end the icebreaker a bit. But it's also, I just want to invite everybody that this is a discussion. So we're going to present some things, but we want you guys to interrogate what we're presenting, ask questions. If at any point during the presentation you want me to stop and go back to something, just raise your hand. If I don't notice it, I'm sure Anthony or Gladwin will. But I think to Nivesh's point, as well as the gentleman there, it has been obviously a quite difficult environment globally. And so what we want to look at basically today is what is that meaning for Africa? What's that meaning for South Africa? And what's that meaning for the fellows and startups in the room? So I kind of have put these 7 drivers of what I think is shaping the current investment and innovation landscape. And these probably aren't comprehensive, but they reflect some of the things that we're seeing in the data that probably are some of the things that you guys are feeling in real life. So the first one is there's been a change in the macro environment, right? We've gone from an environment, at least in a number of the markets where liquidity does translate into more investment onto the continent, a rise in interest rates, rise in inflation, That's a big change from what we saw over the last 10 years, which was, I'm saying this knowing that we've had our fun experience in South Africa as well. I've lived here for the last 11 years, so we're our own kind of anomaly from time to time. But by and large, the major capital markets have really been affected by this change in the macro environment to higher interest rates and higher inflation. And this is meaning that money matters again. And so a lot of the behavior that we saw from 2020 to 2022 is both falling under increased scrutiny, and also lots of people are telling us that things aren't going to be like that again. This is also playing out in terms of what I call fickle foreign funders. So there's a lot of foreign funders that are permanently on the continent and want to do business here and want to invest in startups. But there's also some that kind of at the run up, at the end of the run up in 2021 or 2022, were looking to get exposure. There was low interest rates. They had a lot of capital. It was searching more risky opportunities. They've now retreated a bit, right? So some of the things that we've seen, say in 2021 and 2020 about, Andreessen Horowitz, SoftBank, these guys coming in, making these big deals at the later stage, we've seen those fall away a little bit. There are some people that are replacing them, but they have fallen away, and that is having an impact, particularly at the growth and later stage, because there's less guarantee for investors that they'll be able to find someone else for the follow-on investments as well. And something that we always think about in the investing space is a bit of a baton relay race. Every stage kind of affects the other stage, because that's really what you're working through to support startups as they go through this journey. The other one that we're seeing is, as Nivesh was saying, is local investors are in fundraising mode. So just like startups are raising funds, a lot of local funds are raising as well. And that means that they don't have as much time to focus on deal flow. It's like everybody here or people that have ran a startup know that when you're fundraising, it's hard to focus on the core business. And that's the same type of challenge that investors, particularly on the continent that have been looking to close, have been going through. So we're seeing less funding, less time for deal flow, slower closings as well. There's also increased scrutiny. I don't think Africa or South Africa, any of these markets are unique to having governance or due diligence problems, as the challenge is with Africa, as with most things, is people, foreign investors read 5 or 6 headlines about some company in Ghana, some company in Kenya, et cetera, and they think every single startup has a governance challenge. So they're putting a lot more pressure on due diligence, and they're putting a lot more pressure on local funds as well to conduct due diligence. We're seeing the growth stage particularly squeezed as well. So building on kind of the 2021, 2022 narrative, there was a lot of startups that took really good valuations that may have seemed relatively well priced at the time, given the macro context, that now look really unfavorable. And this is particularly impacting companies that raised at the Series A stage, where we're seeing a lot of squeeze and a lot of fall off between that stage and being able to get to the later or growth stage. We're also seeing a move beyond equity. I think, interesting that you're speaking about debt, because one of the big shifts that we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is more and more startups looking at debt as a potential viable opportunity for raising, but also more funds also considering raising debt funds as well. And then maybe the kind of optimistic story is that while there has been a lot of pain, particularly at this growth stage, and particularly at companies that really raised in 2021, 2022, we're seeing a lot of activity at the early stage, and we're seeing a lot of activity in new sectors and new products. So fintech, e-commerce, and SaaS were the flavor of the month from 2015 to 2021, 2022. We're seeing a bit of a resetting and recycling in some new areas like climate, deep tech, health. So quite promising for you. I was going to follow up after about this guy does a 3D printer deep tech startup doing local manufacturing. And those are the type of things that I'm increasingly seeing investors looking towards. They're telling us we don't want the next delivery app. What's the next thing? Because what they're seeing is this potential run up like they just saw in fintech, e-commerce, et cetera. So how are those 7? So with each of these 7 drivers, we've tried to put together like 1 or 2 slides just to emphasize them. So this is what the global venture funding environment looks like. Over the last 24 months, you can see it significantly slowed. And you can actually see deal flow has significantly slowed, not just the total volume of funding. There was a slight increase at the beginning of this year, but that was really driven by that major OpenAI deal. And AI has been a sector that has seen some type of, I don't know if you call it resilience or excitement or euphoria or building up the next potential bubble, but there has been more funding going towards that. Digital health on a global stage has remained relatively stable. but the same story we've seen in South Africa that we've seen across the world, this fintech and e-commerce, which were the big benefactors of the last decade, have also been two of the areas that we've seen some of the biggest correction. Africa's looks slightly different. So one of the main things that I think I'd want everybody to be aware of when looking at this data is the share of VC funding going to Africa is much smaller than what we're seeing globally, right? I think we have about 1% of the total share of global VC. So these numbers are off quite a low base. But at the same time, Africa does seem to be looking a little bit more resilient, particularly on the deal flow side. And I think a big reason for this is because of the number of public sector funders that we have in the innovation and investment ecosystem, and impact investors like E Squared that have evergreen funds that have continued to be able to support entrepreneurs and startups during this time. And I would say that, you know, in terms of getting back to some of those like pre-COVID 2019 total volume of funding, we have seen kind of a reset back to that level, but there's still a general upward trend off of those 2019, 2018 data. So while the global market is really reeling and falling behind that, it does seem like, at least within the African context, there's been some kind of flattening at that baseline, and there is still a level of deal flow taking place. But what I think Navesh was saying, and I think is really important, is that it's not risk on deal flow. It's really risk off. People are looking for, you know, really guaranteed investments. They're not looking necessarily to take on the same risk that they did in 2020, 2021, more time on due diligence. And one of the things we've seen in the data is this particularly hurts female founders and local founders as well. So what this slide is showing up here is that if you look at the last, you know, 8 years of funding data that we have, and we look at the share of funding going to at least one female founder and the share of funding going to all female founding teams, you can actually see that it kind of goes, and remember, this is the share. So this takes into account the change in the total volumes, actually goes up and down as total volumes go up. So what you're seeing, and I think something that I'm observing quite a bit in a number of discussions we're also having with investors and funds is that we're seeing a risk on behavior, the type of behavior that we want to promote in terms of investing into female founders, investing into local founders, seems to go up and down with how much risk there is in the ecosystem. So that's a little bit of a tricky thing for us to think about, because you guys have a pretty strong mandate that focuses on that. And that's something that E Squared should maybe be thinking about as over the next few years, and how this type of behavior is going to change around investors. Because if, you know, basically the market is perceiving Africa as being too risky, there's not enough capital in it, the people that are going to be most affected are going to be the type of startups and entrepreneurs that you guys are most geared at supporting. So there's a big opportunity still there. And if I go to the next slide, now I'm just a video. That, when you add demographics on top of this, it looks even worse. So this is all female founders. So pasty female founders like myself. As soon as you remove that pasty category from it, it looks even worse. So one of the really kind of major challenges that I think we have within the ecosystem is that we want capital, and we want the ways in which capital are deployed to reach a wider set of individuals and to be more inclusive. But how do you do that in a time where the risk appetite among investors is so guarded? So that's a bit of the story around what we're seeing in terms of global VC, Africa VC, and how we see that playing out and some of the impact on some of the key audiences that this group is looking to support. The other big trend that we're seeing, as I was saying, is these fickle foreign funders also moving off the continent. So mega deals, which is something that we track at Brighter, are deals over $100 billion. They, as you can see in this slide right here, the line that's a little bit small is showing the share of mega deals contribution to overall total volume of funding. They have an outsized influence in the ecosystem. Is it a bug? Is it a feature? It's a reality. These mega deals provide a lot of liquidity and provide opportunities for local investors to exit out of their investments so that they can then get capital back to reinvest into the ecosystem. So when they're working, they're really critical. Think SoftBank coming in and making a huge investment. We are still seeing mega deals happening this year, but the kind of funders that are involved in them have changed a lot. So if you think about where liquidity has been constrained in the world, the UK, the US, the West really, we've seen them basically completely exit the continent. If you think about where liquidity remains, the Middle East, even Japan, we've actually seen a lot of them almost stepping in and replacing from that. So mega deals, which is this red, the total volume is red, the share is that line, we've actually seen them be relatively resilient. And I think this is quite an important part for the ecosystem, but we've seen it change in terms of who they are, Middle East and Japan, and also the type of things they're investing in. If everything was fintech and e-commerce before, as I was saying, as you get more DFIs, as you get more Japanese companies, as you get more Middle East investors in, they're looking a lot more at energy in the climate space. So mega deals, fickle foreign funders, but there is still international funders on the continent. There are still big checks being written. The mega deals is not necessarily where we're seeing the squeeze. The place that we're really seeing the squeeze, and another, I think, big opportunity around for E Squared, and maybe this is something that a number of the startups here feel, is at the growth stage. So we've almost seen a bifurcation in the market where the two areas that actually are remaining relatively resilient are the early stage. Early stage investors are still writing a lot of checks. They're writing it into new types of sectors. They're looking for the next big thing. It makes a lot of sense. Rather than me take a growth stage company that has a $20 million, $30 million valuation that I don't think is right, it's a better bet for me to go in with a company that doesn't have a valuation, maybe write a safe note, or be the first one in doing part of that valuation because they haven't been affected by those big prices in 2021. And then in the late stage, on the mega stage as well, it's really, mega deals basically have the pick, whatever they want, because everybody at that stage is so desperate for capital that they can go in and they can really find the most profitable businesses as well. So if you've been able to make it through growth, you've got profitability, you're super attractive, mega deals are happening. If you're early stage, new sector, new idea showing a lot of potential, we're seeing deal activity happening. If you're between those spaces, we're seeing a lot of pain. And a lot of those places are the type of startups that we're seeing, unfortunately, having to shut down as well.
Value their entrepreneurs are requiring for their startups in the early stage is making it less attractive for your later stage investments because you're coming in and going, I'm not going to be able to return any capital to my LPs if I'm investing at that valuation. So are we maybe seeing some down rounds, or maybe seeing that it's too expensive?
Yeah, and we see that, and one of the things that's not shown here is undisclosed deals, and what we've seen is a huge growth in undisclosed deals, and those are typically associated with down rounds and things like that. So part of, I think, what we're seeing in terms of some of the deal activity at not happening between those stages is just being recorded as undisclosed. And I think that is definitely what we're seeing. And if you speak to startups as well, you know that most of them are trying to go to their current investors at that stage in order to negotiate new type of funding, bridge type of funding rounds, because they're all trying to get to Q1 of next year, to Q2 of next year, where they think things are going to recover. The other thing that we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months that's been quite interesting is there was a pretty big run-up in M&A activity in 2021 and 2022, and there were some big acquisitions that took place. And at the beginning of this year, we also had a huge acquisition of InstaDeep by BioNTech. But over the last 6 months, we've seen smaller exits, undisclosed exits, and we've also seen more startup-on-startup acquisitions as a bit more kind of consolidation in the industry as well. And I think it's great that we're seeing M&A activity still happening, but I don't think it's happening for the same reason. We think one of the reasons it's happening is, one, funding is drying out, which is forcing startups to think about different options they can have to return funding to their current investors or even to kind of exit out from their companies. And the other thing is, particularly companies at the later stage, they're not seeing that late stage capital as much as maybe they saw it previously, thinking that it's a better option to exit through a corporate. So it's been a tough 12 to 18 months. You've seen it in everything from ticket sizes dropping, to funding rounds going longer, to people having to exit earlier from their startups as well and looking for different types of exit pathways. This is a particular slide from the clean tech sector, and I thought it was important. I thought it was a good one to pull up because one of the other trends that we've seen in terms of the type of funding is a bit more, as I was saying, looking at debt. So particularly where you can finance your underlying assets, or in your case, you can do wholesale borrowing in order to help grow your credit business. We have seen more and more debt playing out there as well. And in the clean tech space, which was quite interesting for us, is you've almost seen an inversion where more and more companies that have underlying assets, more startups that have underlying assets are going out and using those assets as leverage in order to get debt so that they can continue their business operations as they position themselves for that next funding round. And this isn't just been in terms of the total volume of funding. We're also seeing it in deals, the number of deals, and we're also seeing it at the early stage as well. There's some innovative companies that are emerging. In South Africa, we have one called Untapped. They provide debt financing. I'm sure a number of you guys have heard about them as well. They've actually been able to close and raise more funding this year. And then we're also seeing MFIs that traditionally lended to SMEs also looking at how, especially some of the more innovative ones, like a company Lendable out of East Africa, looking at how they can also do more of the financing for climate startups as well, particularly where there's an underlying asset. So we are starting to see a little bit more of that. I mean, I'm not sure if that makes us all more comfortable or less comfortable that we've switched to that as a potential tool, but we're definitely seeing that as part of the change in the landscape. In terms of the sectors, so fintech, as I said, had the lion's share of funding for the longest period of time. In 2023, we've actually started to see a little bit of, or quite a bit of, a fall off from it in terms of its share of funding. Clean tech has been the only sector that we've seen increase year-on-year growth, and then health has also been a sector that we've seen still remain relatively resilient. And what we're also seeing around these kind of new sectors is people are moving beyond, SaaS is still kind of in them, but beyond fintech in particular is more specialization. Looking at, okay, in order for us to build startups that can be viable and really be able to grow into these sectors, which often take a longer period of time, what is the kind of network of support that we need to bring together? So we do a lot of work in ag and climate. And what we can see is that there's a lot of funds being specifically set up for climate, a lot of ecosystem programs being specifically set up for climate. We're seeing that just increasing kind of specialization as a broader way, not to just invest in one startup, but to actually stimulate an ecosystem, particularly in areas where it kind of aligns some of the potential positive contributions like in ag and climate with some of the potential financial returns from startups in those spaces. You also see this, I think, as ecosystems mature. You see more of this kind of clustering and specialization around specific areas. So that paints a picture, I think, of a market that's obviously gotten much harder. Particularly over the last 12 to 18 months, with that change in the macro conditions, more and more startups looking for other types of financing that's not just equity-based to raise from. A lot of the squeeze happening at that growth stage, and unfortunately, a lot of the startups also not being able to make it through that, or if they do, having to take down or bridge rounds. And we've also seen this recycling or resetting in terms of the type of products and sectors that we're seeing emerging at the early stage. But we may have some questions, and I think this was a bit of why I asked Navesh at the beginning, that is it possible that this phase is also coming to an end? So the last 12 to 18 months has been very hard, but if we're saying that it's a potential reset, timelines were taking longer to close and all of those things, there was more at the early stage. We're now starting to see kind of early warning signals that funds are starting to close again. So there's a long period. So Brighter tracks not just startups raising funding, but also investors' funds raising funding as well. And over the last couple months, we've seen a number of funds number of organizations or companies that are based on the continent, maybe have like headquarters off the continent, closing some pretty big rounds and in some pretty interesting spaces. So one of the things that we are wondering and what we might see over the next 6 to 8 months is if we see more of this kind of closing, more of these, more funds being able to get to that next type, more investors being able to get to their next fund, starting to see more deal activity as well. So I'm not saying we're out of the last 12 to 18 months. It's obviously been quite an intense time for startups and entrepreneurs, but there are some promising signs in terms of those early stage startups that are getting funding, the new sectors and areas things are going into, and some of these new funds that are being closed. So how is this now playing out in South Africa? So I've always said South Africa is a slightly unique ecosystem compared to the rest of the continent. And one of the big drivers of that is the local ecosystem. And the two major drivers of that local ecosystem are private corporates and angels. So you guys, E Squared, come from funding from a corporate that was obviously quite successful in terms of Alan Gray. There's a number of different private corporates within South Africa that are investing in entrepreneurs, that are investing in the startup ecosystem here. South Africa is also home to the largest amount of private wealth on the continent, which means there's a lot of angel investors as well, which means there's a lot more capital within the local ecosystem that is being deployed towards startups here. You've also just, for the first time, kind of had institutional capital come off the sidelines with the SA SME Fund raising its first VC fund. And then the two other ones that I wanted to highlight as well in terms of what I see driving the ecosystem is a big shift in terms of climate and green. And I think this is partly part of load shedding, partly part of the overall commitments of the country to decarbonize and move away from its reliance on coal. And then I think the government, for everything we say about them, they're trying not to be an inhibitor. They're trying to be an enabler. They're not going to change exchange control regulations today. They're not going to change IP regulations. So they're trying to find other ways that they can come in and help to de-risk investments and to support startups. And that's really being done by a number of the different agencies they have. So, I think these types of things are really playing out and making South Africa's ecosystem, I wouldn't say any less hard, but still creating pockets of opportunities for good businesses. So South Africa has actually almost seen the same amount of funding raised by this period by startups as was raised in all of 2022. So what we've actually were quite surprised at the beginning of the year was seeing how many deals were actually being done in Q1 and Q2. Funding definitely peaked in 2021. There was a number of mega deals, particularly in the fintech sector, that were taking place. And we have seen deal flow declining, but remember, this is when I did this for 2023, it was only through September. So there's still 3 more months of the year, and we're actually expecting it to be, there would be more deals this year in South Africa and more funding than there was in 2022. South Africa, while it has a very strong local ecosystem, it also is very good at attracting international funders into the space. It creates a little bit of complications in terms of how you partner with them. But when we look at the number of active investors, I mean, more than 2/3 are companies that have operations abroad. But I want to come back to this role of just how big of a role the corporates play here. One of the things in a lot of other ecosystems across Africa is there's a lot of grant funding from DFIs that are running awards or competitions. We don't have as much of that in South Africa. I always tell Gladwin, donors consider South Africa too rich. It's not an LCIM country. I think everybody here may think that they haven't spent a lot of time in South Africa, but there is definitely like a little bit of thinking South Africa is almost too rich for them to get support. That's changing a little bit, but it's put a lot of pressure on private corporations to provide those types of grants, provide those types of awards to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem and startups. And then I would say that we also, unlike a number of other kind of countries on the continent, we have a lot of kind of purely commercial investors that are actively involved at the early stage. And I think this, the other bit in terms of this corporate sector is that we have the most acquisitions on the continent as well. It may be that that's because it's very hard for us to get late stage funding, but the other side is we have a lot of corporates here. So you have exit pathways in which you can sell your startup to, which is also quite attractive for local VCs. Whenever you speak to them, they always tell you, I'm in the business of exits. So ultimately, this is a very good narrative for South Africa, given how many startups from South Africa had exited. But you can still see that there's a lot of gaps at the late stage. So in some of those cases, there may have been early exits because they couldn't get late stage funding. Fintech historically has captured the lion's share of funding in South Africa as well. Time Bank, these companies in 2021 and that have taken big deals. We just saw Stitch, which is a fintech company based here, but with operations across the continent. Obviously, also just have a big close this year. So fintech hasn't gone away. It represents a huge part of the startup ecosystem. But definitely over the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen investors starting to look beyond those sectors as well. Clean tech, South Africa has not had a big clean tech ecosystem, startup pipeline, just because of historical regulations from it, has really seen a jump over the last 6 to 12 months. We've seen investments also in things like entertainment, so Carry First, a gaming company. We're seeing more and more diversity in terms of the type of startups that are actually getting funding. one of the things that I keep hearing from investors is we don't just want the next delivery app. But representativeness still remains a major problem. So, across the continent, I showed you the gender gap, and then I showed you what it looked like when you also layer race on top of it. When we look at South Africa and we think about the demographics of South Africa, and then we look at the percentage of funding that's going to either female founders or Black founders, we're still lagging behind significantly. And these numbers lag behind Kenya, Nigeria, most of the other markets on the continent as well. So there's still a major area that needs to be addressed there. And in one of the projects that Anthony and I did with the UK government here, where we analyzed angel investment, what we can see is there's a link, particularly at the early stage, between what color skin you are, what gender you are, and the networks you have access to and end up investing in. The other side of this is that a lot of the pain for female founders is actually at the late stage. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a lot of early stage funds coming in, Enigma Ventures, Grindstone, 535, Womb Hub, all coming in to address this gender gap, but there's still later stage issues as well. And as you could see, mega deals represent such a big portion of the ecosystem that or the total amount of funding, that only takes 1 or 2 of those deals to change the numbers quite significantly. But clearly, even within those mega deals, we're not seeing a lot of it going to startups with female founders. I think the one that's probably would drive a lot of it is the InstaDeep acquisition. So that's my story for you guys around Africa and South Africa. I think an ecosystem, definitely what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months has been more pressure on startups, more pressure on local funds. South Africa has seen a little bit more resilience to this because they have more local capital. They're not as reliant on foreign funders, but it hasn't been that much easier. We are seeing a lot more investment we are still in deal flow still happening at the early stage, seeing it happening in new products, new sectors as well. But we're still seeing these kind of stubborn gaps, particularly in having the type of inclusive investment and impact that we want to have. That's still a challenge that needs to be addressed. So now I'm going to hand over to Anthony, who's going to tell you, okay, you guys were supposed to ask throughout the presentation. No, teasing. Wait, so do you guys want Anthony to go first, or should I stop here for these questions? Okay, so we've got 3. Lady first.
Hi, so I'm Sipe. I wanted to understand, you mentioned a couple of times that investors are getting more nervous about riskier startups. And then you said as a result of that, they are investing less in women and African, local, yeah, I'm guessing that's a euphemism, but local investors. What is driving that? Are there numbers that the investors are looking at that are driving the perception of risk? Or is it just purely lack of trusting those people?
So I think I'm not 100% sure what's driving it. Just looking at the data is showing the outcome, but I have 1 or 2 hypotheses, so I could be very wrong about this. But that the pressure that fund managers are feeling to raise is particularly felt for those that don't have a track record and were new fund managers over the last 4 or 5 years. That's where we saw the increase in representation, because kind of like you invest in your networks, the people you know. And I think that's really where you're feeling the kind of risk-off behaviors. They typically might have been able to pull in capital or financing from institutional investors or family offices that wanted to kind of support or take on more risk, but now maybe they're less comfortable investing in putting money in funds that don't have that track record. And a lot of the new funds are unfortunately been set up by local and female founders. And I think that's the double whammy that's being felt. And then I think the pipeline of early stage investing is still growing, particularly for female founders and local founders as well. There's a number of initiatives that are still being set up to support that. So I don't think it's just at the early stage. I think at the early stage, we're still seeing some of that, but people are just hesitant people want to see more information now. They want to see more traction. So if these startups have been set up in the last 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 years, they may still be at a stage where they just don't have enough traction or enough kind of, might not have the right type of information that the investors are currently looking for. And I think that's kind of the thing, is that all the gains we had over the last 2 or 3 years with increasing representation in terms of fund managers, increasing the amount of funding that was going to supporting programs focusing on local and female founders, those things were only just starting to show like impact in 2021, 2022. And now we've had this big kind of macro event, which is making people maybe not have as much money to put into that, maybe just have general concerns about having to balance financial returns and some of that type of focus as well. So I think that's like the double whammy. You're seeing it a lot on the fund manager side, and them really, that funds without having a track record really struggling. And then you are seeing it for startups across the board, just in general, struggling to be able to reach the certain milestones that investors are looking for. And I think that's why the data is starting to not look as good. No. Okay. Okay.
Okay, hi. Sorry, I'm an edtech entrepreneur, and I did get an opportunity to chat to Anthony for a bit. So I kind of have like a twofold question. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about your fund, like how big your fund is, what your ticket size is, what's your mandate, and then also if you have any comments on edtech, essentially, because in the presentation you don't really cover it as much. So I just wanted to get more information on that. And Anthony mentioned that you guys, to a certain extent, are a VC for VCs. So I know you're helping a lot of VCs, you know, with fundraising. But I wanted to ask if you have any relationships or direct relationships with any startups by any chance.
So we're not. So Brighter's not a VC or doesn't have a fund or invest. We just do data and research. But Anthony definitely does have some of those networks. So afterwards, definitely get in touch. In terms of edtech, we have not seen. We've seen a lot of deal flow in edtechs, particularly supported by the Ingenie Accelerator and the MasterCard Foundation. But we haven't seen a lot of edtechs be able to get that kind of growth type of, have business models that have been able to attract as much growth funding. We've seen Go One, and we've seen kind of, what was the one in South Africa that exited? Get Smarter, but they seemed more like noise than signals about the sector necessarily having found business models that can really work. But I think we're seeing a lot now, more funding being put into that, particularly at the early stage. I think COVID, people kind of were into the remote learning space, and it kind of fell off quite quickly. Now I think we're starting to see some more interest at that, but we haven't seen it pulling through in terms of the total volume of funding.
Just to follow up, because you were talking about there's not really any high growth players in the field with sustainable business models. What would you say would be a decent week on week growth rate to meet that criteria?
So I'm going to have to leave those questions for Anthony. I can only speak at kind of the high level in terms of seeing, you know, Go One and Get Smarter being some exceptions, but I think we are seeing, like with the Ingenie Accelerator, kind of them also rethinking the type of models that they're looking to promote. I don't know the type of growth that you would necessarily need to have, but I think there's just still interest in the edtech space, but we haven't necessarily seen some of those like multiple $100 million as we have seen in fintech or e-commerce so far.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Hi, David.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So now, so in terms of all those hard questions around then, how is this playing out in terms of what you need to do as a startup and how it's also impacting upon your fundraising timelines, I'm going to hand over to Anthony.
Good. And we have about 3 minutes to cover everything, so we're going to have to speed through this. And I've got 2 slides. I'm going to kind of go through them very, very high level, the contents in them, but the 2 things I'll note is we've got some expanded slides that expand upon each point within the slides themselves, and also we're going to be here all day, so happy to kind of have breakouts over lunch, discuss things and answer some of the more pressing questions. So I think I've only got time to really cover my slides, but if I get the slides up. Firstly, why is there a British guy talking to you in South Africa about fundraising here? My organisation, separate to David's, we do a lot of work around capital mobilisation in international markets. So we work with ecosystems in Europe, the UK, North America and Asia, where investors are looking to understand and access opportunities on the continent, both from a direct allocation into founders like yourselves, but also as LPs, so investing into funds themselves as well. So that's the relation comes from. Although my mum actually, although not South African, grew up in her formative years in Sunnyside in the shadows of Loftus. So I've got some close ties to here as well, albeit I haven't lived here myself. So expanding upon kind of what David was talking about, over the last year or so, particularly here in South Africa, we've been working with a number of funds locally, as well as internationally looking at opportunities, and then working with a portfolio of high-growth technology startups across several verticals similar to those of the startups in the room today. And so the kind of key points I'm going to share, and again, I'm going to really speed through these because I haven't got much time, are some observations, some of the sentiment we're seeing both from the founder and the funder side to what's going in the investment ecosystem and the approaches that should be being taken by founders when it comes to fundraising. So the considerations more kind of externally from the market. The first thing is extending that raise timeline. David touched upon it, that funds are seeing it taking long to close out. Novest said 2 to 3 times to close out their fund. When it comes to fundraising as founders, we need to be extending our timelines out from, if you were looking at 6 months to 12 months. And this is as much because it's going to take that long to potentially get the right investors over the line, particularly if some of those investors aren't allocating right now. But it's also as much to create yourself a sustainable pathway to ensure you don't run out of cash at the wrong time and it falters your business growth and ultimately doesn't get you to that next close. You really need to start thinking, if you're not already, capital as an enabler rather than necessity. So understanding that actually you're building a business and a model that is sustainable in its own right, and that the capital that you are raising is specifically to determine an acceleration of that growth. There are a lot of startups we've recently seen in the news and press that have gone bust for various reasons, who've also raised lots of capital. And a lot of them became very capital intensive in their kind of growth mechanisms, rather than having sustainable models whereby they could continue to go on even if they didn't have the capital. And so we need to be building into our strategy that we're not dependent on getting that capital, particularly if it's going to take longer, or indeed that capital just doesn't exist right now in the market. Understanding your financial options. So debt was mentioned, grant funding was mentioned. A lot of people come to us immediately saying we want to meet the VCs and do equity funding, and that isn't right for everybody. And a lot of businesses right now are building their investment models around equity based on what's happening in the West and the US and Europe, where actually for a lot of companies in Africa, you can be more seen as almost SMEs rather than these kind of tech companies in the equity. So looking at debt, looking at grant funding, other options, and understanding how they work to understand what are the return expectations of those funders, because they can be fundamentally different from each one. And ultimately that might determine what funding's more aligned to you in terms of the return expectations, the growth expectations for your business. So I think for everybody here who may be going through that first round, particularly even that second round, is look at those different options and understand what the value exchange would look like and what works best to de-risk your business in terms of the expectations the investors will have. Being super targeted and really intentional with your investor relations. So we see a lot of founders taking a real scattergun approach, reaching out to every investor they possibly can, particularly right now when capital is scarce, and reaching out to a lot of these investors. But ultimately, it is a waste of your time and it is a waste of the relationship with that investor's time. Not as many people are doing the deep research to understand, not just if that fund aligns in terms of, are we the right stage? Do we align with their thesis that they're looking to invest in? But also, where are they in their fundraising time cycle? Are they currently allocating capital? Are they coming to the end of their fund where they're probably doubling down on existing portfolio companies? Or, as we're seeing a lot right now, are actively raising themselves, so aren't deploying capital? So finding that right time to position the relationship. If it's a fund that maybe doesn't align right now, they could be a fund for you guys in your future round, or if you're in that extended timeline saying, actually, we'll come back to them on a secondary or third close. So really going into depth and understanding those funds to be able to build those relationships. Because when you reach out and you have those first impressions, you want to have that alignment that they know you understand their fund and where they're at. So even if you're not raising now with them, they might be somebody you can come back to in the future. Creating an effective and efficient fundraising engine. So one of the things we're seeing right now with founders is it is taking a lot longer to raise and a lot more effort's having to go into raising, having to search a lot further afield to get that funding, is making sure that you have a fundraising infrastructure in your business, a mechanism that allows you to do that in an efficient process. Particularly if you're a solo founder where you're doing everything, the great thing about when you have multiple founders or a leadership team, somebody can dedicate themselves to that fundraising process and plug and play back into the team for what they need. But particularly if you're a solo founder, it's making sure they have that infrastructure, that kind of sales, CRM, esque methodology for how you're approaching fundraising to make it as efficient as possible, but to reduce simply your time out of the business, when if it's taking you up to a year to raise, that can have a real detrimental effect on how your business grows. And we've got some great resources I can share with you about how you build that infrastructure out. And again, forgive me, we're speeding through this because I've only got a couple minutes left, but I will definitely share resources so you can expand upon all these points. One of the things as well that's been mentioned is because of some of the failings we've seen in the ecosystem that capital is reducing, there's a lot more scrutiny now happening in the due diligence phase, where investors are doubling down to understand things that you may have previously seen being in the data rooms at a later stage of fundraising. So having that data room and having your ability to create that data and provide that easily to investors is really, really important, particularly for speed of getting that investment over the line and making the jobs easier for investors. So thinking about what your data room looks like from day one, even if you don't have those data points yet or need those data points yet, is really important up front. So that infrastructure goes back to that point of making a really efficient investment process. You're building out that data room ahead of when you eventually need it. And also then the governance of the business. So it's been quite mad, some of the businesses that we've seen who've gone under in the last 6 months, where there seems to be a critical failing of governance. What was the board doing in terms of management of the business and its leadership and its capital? So like the due diligence, there's a lot of scrutiny now on that leadership in your business, who are the support functions around it. And also for yourselves, if you are, say, building out a board for the first time and you're bringing on investors, what do those investors bring to the table that's going to help ensure you have a very robust governance process that oversees and makes sure your business has the right growth going forward. So really, even if you are first time thinking about fundraising, you'll think, well, we haven't got a due diligence room yet, that data room. We haven't thought about a board yet. Thinking about these things up front now and planning for them will make things a lot easier in the future, but it'll also make you think fundamentally about how you're building and growing your business as you maybe go into those cycles of fundraising. So quick breakdown from a market consideration. If we look a little bit more deeply inside your business from a fundraising process, what are investors wanting to see? Has anything changed? A couple of points that we've really seen when we ran a program called Founder to Funder earlier this year in South Africa. We took 20 high growth tech companies across multiple sectors who are looking to raise either first international rounds or expand their investment fundraising capacities. And we've helped most of them raise over the last kind of 6 months or so. And these are some of the sentiments we drew down from going through that process with them. The first thing was, and I think David talked about it, where you've got in markets very repeatable fintech businesses that are very similar. It's no longer enough to just have slight differentiations and tweaks on other people in the market. Investors are fundamentally looking for something that's very unique, that stands out, and being able to really portray that beyond fine-tuned little elements is going to be really, really important when investors are ultimately investing less and taking less risks. Making growth actually meaningful. So again, customer acquisition, we've seen a lot of companies growth at all costs, raising a lot of capital to get that growth, but have ultimately not been building a sustainable business model under that. So actually, revenues, retention of customers, those numbers are the really important ones alongside that growth, and normally the ones that are going to bring more investors in, but also if you're having to protract out your fundraising process, because you haven't got enough capital coming in from investors, you need to be able to have that business model behind it that's actually kind of supporting you along that journey. And that's something investors are looking a lot more right now as they're scrutinizing these businesses. And again, it comes back to the extension. The GPs, the general partners of these funds, have their limited partners, their investors, who are scrutinizing them. So they're having to justify everything more and more, but also want to make sure the businesses they're investing in are sustainable businesses that they can support through that growth phase. Knowing your numbers and getting your numbers into your investors. So again, we talk about wanting to make profitable businesses. What does that profitability model look like? What does that timeline actually realistically look like? A lot of people talk about that and they have a vague understanding of how it's going to be, but really talking about how you're going to get there. So it might not be that we have a profitability date in 18 months, but we have a clear model for that's going to get us to profitability, and there may be bumps across that route, but we actually have something very clearly there. It is critically important. There's a scalable kind of execution methodology that a number of people have talked about, talent design and distribution. So how do you clearly, effectively demonstrate that to investors? They're the kind of 3 key paradigms we talk about when we work with our investors and founders. So talent being that team. Do you have those people in your team who are uniquely placed to execute on what you're doing? They have that industry background and knowledge. They have the application, a bit of background knowledge, and they have that diversity of people in their team. And even where you don't necessarily have all those people, particularly if you're a solo founder, is being able to talk to investors about these are the key hires that we need in the business where our skill gaps are missing. And right now, we've got the ability to execute. But if we're going to scale this and we're going to utilize capital you give us, our first key hires are going to have to be X, Y, and Z if we don't already have them in the team. And again, in particular, if we're solo founders. Design, more broadly talking to actually the product itself and how that operates in the space, how that operates for the customers and users. Again, is it one that acquires the customers but then retains them and makes them pay for it? And that thing that's unique, that's solving that problem. And then finally, do you have a scalable model? Can you distribute this at scale? The capital that you're bringing in should be about scaling that up and accelerating that pathway to growth. Do you have that clear model for doing it? And again, goes back to the team, that experience or capacity to do it, or you're going to bring the right people in to do it. So thinking about those three key things, which are no longer on the screen, but if I could have the slide back up, because I'm definitely going to have to look back at it. They are really important projects, and we've got like a blog on it that talks about how you kind of conceptualize that at the early stage. Then finally, final 2 points, knowing how to leverage your investors. So it's not just about, am I being played off? Is this like an Oscar speech? Okay, give me 1 minute. Just dial that back 1 second. Read the questions. I'll start dancing otherwise. Very quickly. So often I speak to a lot of founders. It seems like a very one-way street. You're going to the investors, asking for money, telling them what you can do for them. But it's really, really important right now is seeing what the investors can do for you and where that strategic and fit happens beyond the capital. If you look at emerging markets, the investors and others have a really difficult job outside of European investors I work with. The markets are matured, the support mechanism there. With investors on the continent here, we like to call them market makers. They don't just allocate the capital, they've got to build the ecosystem. They've got to support your growth, but the wider ecosystem growth. So they're a lot more hands-on in their mentality, and then they have to have a lot more strategic input and support. So when you're researching the investors you want to go for that have capital, what is the strategic value that they can align to you? Is it introductions to people? Do they already have access to markets? Do they have portfolio company founders that are in adjacent markets that might be able to help you on that next growth stage in terms of shared learning and knowledge? Where you can demonstrate that you understand their fund and how to leverage them, that's going to give them more buy-in to you, saying that you fundamentally understand how markets work, how they work. So think about it as a two-way street, but also ask the investors those questions as well. How can they help you beyond the capital? Because there's so much more than just the money they're going to put in the bank for you. Then finally, before I get played off again, fundraising to achieve milestones. We see a lot of pitch decks and people pitching surface level. We need X amount of money, 40% for marketing, X and Y. Now, you go more depth than that, but really, instead of thinking about money as a runway enabler, it's an objective and outcome enabler. So we want to raise $500,000, which is going to get us to this level of growth, this many user retention with this version of our product. And our key milestones are this hire, access to this market and this customer. Paint me the picture of where we're going to get to as outcomes and not where we're going to get to in terms of date in the calendar, and what that next thing that's going to enable you beyond that. And when we get to that end of that line of what we're achieving, this is what it's going to allow to unlock, which is either a future round or profitability or whatever it might be. Again, demonstrating a more clear picture of what the money specifically unlocks to investors so they can paint the picture of knowing when you get to the end of the line, because often these investors, they're investing in you, and the next step is they're going to hand you off in that relay baton race to the next investor. So what confidence do I have that my money's going to get you to a point where we can hand that baton over and go forward? And I don't mind if that's 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months. Does it feel like a realistic thing we can achieve and actually a bit more flexibility in the timeline? Now, really appreciate I've gone through all that very quickly and there was a lot to cover there. So I will share some expanded slides and some resources, but be around all day to answer any questions you have or David has as well. Thank you for taking up all the time, David. I really appreciate it. But thank you for listening to me briefly, and look forward to the rest of the conversations today and hopefully engaging with you all this afternoon.
Anthony,
thank you, and thank you, Gladman, for having us. Thank you.
Anthony, you've got 5 minutes.
We've got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you nag at them, they'll go to you. Okay, do you want to get up as well? Or Q&A? Yeah, do you want to get up and we can answer a couple of questions together? I think all the questions are for you. Yeah, was there any questions?
Yeah, David, I want to come back to you. And I sort of like want to dial it back a little bit. I want to dial it back a little bit and say, given what we were set up to do, effectively, we were set up to be able to basically go through all these different cycles in the market and all that stuff, and be able to still deliver impact through investments. That's what we're set up to do. So now my question is, how do you see us? And I mean, this is obviously coming through from having heard your talk a couple of times, but how do we basically attack this gridlock, this sort of like dependency on, large dependency across Africa and including South Africa on foreign funds, which can be risk off at any time, and then money is taken away off the table for emerging markets, and again, less so for groups like female and Black founders. And how do we catalyze for impact? And now I just want to add one last thing to that question, and that's a comment that's something that came through from another presentation, which is coming from the Clayton Christensen's foundation, which is around really going in and having these market-creating innovations. Because the thinking for me is that we're trying to solve for almost symptomatic things at the top, and maybe there's a need for some research, I don't know, but the idea is to say that is the problem not the fact that there isn't a good sort of like infrastructural support within industry, at a sort of like at the core level of the economies in Africa. And what could, with that in mind, what could eSquared do? Should we be working closer with DFIs who typically play in the space and try and open up from that perspective so that at least things can happen, because we can't sort of like delay the solutions to the suffering that's on the continent. Thanks.
That's like the $1 million question, I think, for the strategy for eSquared as well. But maybe just three thoughts on it. I think you guys are positioned quite well as an evergreen fund, right? Yeah. So you can be counter-cyclical. Exactly. And during those periods, you can also do it at much better deals as well. So thinking about almost not necessarily when the market's going up, how do you get in on the gains, but as the market's going down, where do those opportunities created for you? And that's something that Gladwin and I have been speaking around. And the second bit is then the market maker idea, not just around how startups are creating markets, but also around how VCs and investors create markets as well. And something that Gladwin and I were also speaking about is how do you become an enabler of enablers? So I think one of the things in South Africa is, do you need another VC fund? There's a lot of VC funds out there. A lot of them have been created. Do we need more breadth, or do you need more depth for VC funds? Do we need more depth for some of the early stage fund managers that I was speaking about before that are struggling to raise from other type of institutional capital? And I think that's a huge role that you guys can play. And then the third one is, I think the reason that we're seeing sector specialization, the way we are is for the exact point you're saying, which is really like SaaS and fintech was able to run off the back of the mobile phone to a large extent. But now, as we get into more complicated sectors like agriculture and climate and energy and all these, we need to bring the whole kind of potential value chain together. And I think that's why you're seeing sector specialization, so that you can identify the right corporates, identify the right PE, identify the right institutional investors, and bring them together around supporting innovation in that space. And that's where you guys are uniquely positioned to do all three of those things. Be counter-cyclical, be able to invest in others that are already active in the ecosystem, provide more depth. And then the third thing is leverage your clout in the country in particular to grab together other corporates in particular sectors and work with them.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think one thing too as well, add on that is, if you look at the proportion of capital and venture capital in Africa as a whole, as a proportion of the people on the continent, as the opportunities scale across the continent, the reality is venture capital is not going to service that scale of people and businesses. So we talk about the evolution of models of venture capital, we bring in debt, we bring in loans, but actually there's going to probably be a whole new investment model and vehicle and allocation of capital that's going to have to be created. And we talk more about this again. You look at some of the regions in the continent, there is a very much a replication of growth at all costs, North American, European capital that doesn't fully work here on the African continent, whereas SME funding is a lot more businesses that are more aligned to that type of funding rather than these tech scalable businesses. So we also know that over the next decade, there should be emerging categories that are not yet here in investment and be looking at those as well that are complementary to and support. But ultimately as well, ask yourself, what type of business are you? Are you the venture-backed tech business, or actually are you something fundamentally different? And that's something really important when we talk with our founders, is we go back to what we call basics and just look at the fundraising landscape. What fundraising options are there? What are the return expectations, and what aligns to your business model? And as founders, that's something I think you need to make sure you're looking at before you go down any fundraising route. Is that, and also as well for investors or fund managers in this room, what are the best vehicles for that? So yeah, very aligned to what David was saying, but I think there's gonna be a lot more different funding coming to space to service this huge market that is bigger than Europe and America combined. Any other questions, or are we done now? I think we're done. No more questions. Questions in the break. And thank you very much, guys. We appreciate your time. You guys enjoyed that, right? That was exciting.
Thank you so much, David and Anthony, for the very insightful presentation and responses to those questions. We're going to forfeit our break because we started a little bit late, so we'll go straight into our first panel conversation. And the theme of our panel conversation is optimizing investment ecosystem partnerships and collaborations. And our moderator for the first panel conversation will be Mr. Gladwin Liu, who is the CEO of E-Squared. And we'll be having, part of the panel is Nivesh, Pater, Bakang Komanyane, Matthew Saunders, and Lumka Mlambo. So thank you. We'll call up.
I actually just want to ask, what are your guys' opinions on the theme? Are you guys excited about the topic that we're going to be going into right now? Or do you guys want to add your thoughts on the first conversation that we've already had? There's no hands. You guys are telling me you don't have a thought. All right. No, so anybody? Yes, thank you, ma'am. Can I please get a mic right there? Thank you so much. Fantastic.
Hi. So for me, my thoughts is that was actually quite insightful, especially the side about what investors think about and basically what they're looking for, almost getting the insights of the person that you're going to be pitching to. Because when you are pitching, it's very important to know your audience and know what they care about and know what numbers they're looking for, because there's a lot of information, and if you try to give them all the information, people just zone out. But if you can be able to start with what they care about, then they can decide right in the beginning whether they're interested or not.
No, absolutely. I think I just wanted to ask a question, and it was asked already. I think how it was phrased was, has anybody here raised funds over the past 12 months? But even with everything that we've received from today, I think the question that I have is, anybody going to be raising funds within the next 12 months? Because I think that what Anthony and David have given us, guys, that is a lot of food. And I think that you can gain so much from applying what they have shared with us. And is there anybody going to be raising funds within the next 12 to 18 months? Oh, fantastic. And so I don't know if you want to tell us a bit about your business, or can we... I
know that one of the hands is going to be presenting later today for Startup Founder Pitch. So we're interested in seeing and
so guys, we're just buying time. Thank you so much for allowing us to buy time. So right now we're going to be welcoming the chief himself. Thank you.
Guys, yeah, so thank you very much, everyone. Sorry, we are running quite a bit late. And so, yeah. The panel that we're going to be working with today are guys from the industry. So we've got Matthew Saunders from Future Africa. We've got Bakang from E4E Africa. We've got Nivesh, and we heard obviously that Norskin 22 has just raised a $205 million fund. And then we've got a different side of things by having Lumka join us from the SME Fund, who they are fund of funds, and they're funding other funders so that we can encourage or increase the impact that we're having in the ecosystem. So if everybody's mic'd up, I'm gonna ask you guys to please join me on stage, and then we'll kick off this next segment. So, like Tamala said, we got a lot of food, a lot of insight from Anthony and from David, and we have on the stage with us. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. We have active investors on the continent, and I'm really grateful that you guys have made the time to share with some of our founders in the room, with some of those that are thinking at coming into the space, and Anthony did a great job at laying out the fundamentals in terms of what needs to be, or how our founders need to be prepping themselves to raise funding. But before we get into it, I maybe want to give over to you guys to maybe introduce yourself. Rumka, we'll start with you, the rose among the thorns, to introduce yourself and what SME Fund does, and then the same with the gentleman on your left. So we'll start with you.
Cool, thank you. My name is Lambo. I'm a fund principal with the SME Fund. Are we on? Hi. Yes. Okay. Hi, my name is Lumkam Lambo. I'm the fund principal with the SME Fund. What we do at the SME Fund, we're a fund of funds manager. We're currently, I think, South Africa's largest institutional investor into venture capital. Our first fund was a 1.4 billion rand fund that was as a result of 50 of South Africa's largest corporates coming together with the PIC, in a partnership that really was meant to see how they could assist early stage businesses, small, medium enterprises, and that's how the SME Fund was born. In our first fund, which is completely committed and deployed, we've supported 10 venture capital funds, a lot of which were first-time fund managers, some experienced managers, and some debt fund managers. We're currently raising, but we have reached first close on our second fund, which is a venture capital fund of funds. So we're looking at completely venture capital in this latest iteration of our fund, and we've already put that into 4 investments, and we're looking to close at around 1.3 billion rand sometime in the next 6 months, hopefully.
Is mine working? Yep. Hey everybody. So my name is Nivesh. I'm an investment manager at Norskin 22. We are a Pan-African growth fund focused on investing into tech-enabled businesses on the continent. We've got teams in Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, and South Africa. We've just closed our first fund, so actively deploying capital. We're growth stage, so check sizes are generally between $5 to $10 million. And sectors that we're investing in are pretty typical: fintech, health tech, ed tech, and mostly B2B marketplaces. Yep.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Bakang Komanyani. I'm principal at E3 Africa Ventures. We're an entrepreneur-centric fund that invests in founders that are solving some of the most important problems on the continent. We fully deployed on our first fund and are raising our second fund now, which we reach our first close on by the end of this year. And our second fund will be Pan-African, whereas the first fund was most only investing in South Africa.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Saunders. Same surname as David, so we got to do some checking after this. But yeah, I'm the head of investments for Future Africa. At Future Africa, we are a Pan-African sector agnostic fund, early stage, so most of our investments are pre-seed and seed. So we are currently raising our third fund, and our first 2 we've already deployed capital from. So We also started deploying capital from our third fund, so targeting a $50 million fundraise. And we've invested in 106 portfolio companies across the continent, majority in South Africa, East Africa, so Kenya, and also Nigeria, and then looking at other regions across the continent. So about 20 countries we've invested in across the continent. And we've got, from the 106 companies, we've already exited 6. So some experience across the board. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. I think, Lumka, I'm going to start with you. And my question primarily is around, as Matthew's talking about day raising, Bakang's talking about day looking at hitting close, Nivesh and the guys have just closed. And as part of David's, I mustn't get the two of you confused now, right?
Happens all the time.
So just closed, and then from David's presentation, speaking about maybe the winter's thawing a little bit. As a capital deployer, as a capital allocator, are you seeing a lot more of that? And what has been, what are you as a capital allocator looking for when you're partnering with other capital allocators into funds specifically?
So your question was around, am I seeing drying up of capital?
Firstly, so the thaw is the thaw that David spoke about in his presentation. Are we seeing that? Because, like I said, Northern having closed, Bakang speaking about they are closing, and then Matthew speaking about them raising at the moment. So are you seeing that thaw and more capital coming into the space? But more importantly, what are you looking for when looking at funds?
Fund managers. Okay. I mean, I think there's two parts. We as a fund of funds were also raising. And so it was interesting. It was a long journey in raising capital and for South Africa market, for South African VC market. As a South African fund of funds manager, a lot of the people where we had experience in trying to raise capital, people were like, we want a Pan-African fund, and we're like, we think there's a lot of money that's still required just to service South Africa. So we've walked that journey, so we understand the difficulty that fund managers are facing in terms of raising capital, because we faced the same journey, right? And then in terms of just looking at fund managers, the SSME fund is looking, well, the new VC fund of funds is looking at sort of Series A to Series C managers, partly because our first fund was really catalytic in South Africa. We funded early managers, first-time fund managers. The source of capital is forcing us into this later stage, more experienced manager, and that's, I think, one of your earlier panelists was speaking in that as the money is drying up, people are looking for fund managers with experience, with experienced teams, a really good pipeline, showing some exits. And that's what we're grappling with in our fund when we're looking at funds. Also, it's a small market. There's a little bit of capital. Where else are they going to raise capital from? Because we may be an anchor investor, but they have to go out and raise other capital. And so this is why for us it's so important that guys like yourselves as potential co-funders exist in this market so that we have other people who can invest in our funds and make it a meaningful environment. We look at South Africa specifically, but I think the same can be said if you look at the continent broadly. In my other hat as an ISD member of the MasterCard Africa Growth Fund, I mean, we're seeing the same issues where fund managers are looking to raise, but capital is drying up, and capital that's looking at gender lens, impact, and all those sort of things. It's really difficult for fund managers out there raising capital. But I think the more people partner together, Fireball, whether it's Fireball or whether it's us and you guys, I think that's really, really important.
So as more capital is being introduced into the space and you guys are closing your funds, have between the three of you, Nivesh, Bakang, and Matthew, have you ever invested on transactions together?
Not yet.
Well, we've invested in a few of Matthew's companies since Future Africa has 100 plus of them and selects great companies. So for sure, we definitely look at really strong early fund managers and try and collaborate in terms of looking at their portfolio companies, because we come in generally at a later stage. So that's worked with us. I mean, Bakang and I have been trying for a long time to do a deal together, not yet successfully, but hopefully in the future.
Yeah, I just double down on what you said, Navesh. So we actually have collaborated with quite a lot of other VCs that invest at the stage that we do, which is seed, pre-series A, going into A, and with Norskin being slightly sort of later stage, we haven't yet collaborated. And Matt and I are definitely going to chat after this about opportunities to invest.
Yeah, 100%. For us, we aspire to be one of the first checks, if not the first check that a startup gets, like traditional checks or VC check. So we often partner and look at our feeder being our own accelerator program, but then it also comes from so accelerator programs, incubators, and also just our own thematic views on where we think the space is growing. And then from that point onwards, one of the big things that we do is also support our portfolio companies, like through getting to that next hurdle, which is raising your next round, which is a seed round or a Series A round and so forth. So that's where the partnerships do come in.
So aligned with that, and like Lucas saying, you guys are looking for more exits, and you guys are looking to support. And so, like I think David was saying, it's a delay, right? And so David, Matthew, you're saying you're starting very early on at your. Are you looking at pre-seed or just looking pre-seed. At pre-seed? Are there some notable investments that you've made, and how have you crowded in other funding with other partners? It doesn't have to be ones on the stage, but other funders in order to get into that early stage?
Yeah, I mean, probably the most notable one that we can talk about right now is our investment in Move. So Move is a Nigerian vehicle financing platform, and we were the first check that they got. So first VC check that they got. A cool story is that we actually were helping them secure really important, they were pre-revenue, secure their first partnership with Uber, which was a big hurdle, took many months. There's even a picture of our founding partner having put the number plate on the first vehicle that they got. So I think that's sort of how we envision our relationship with our portfolio companies. So that's like one company to talk about. One notable company where we were the first check. Then I think the nice thing about talking about Move is that they started off with, I would say, traditional capital. Then they raised debt financing, and then they brought in other sort of DFI, and now they're raising again private equity. So they're actually taking into account all these different types of capital that they exist, and they're doing really well at that. It is arguably a bit slower than what you'd expect in like Silicon Valley for a startup to go from zero to a unicorn status, but they are doing it in a very sustainable way. So I think they're a superb example to bring about.
Bakang, what are some of the things that you would say were maybe with having other institutional investors on a cap table, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced with sitting across from other investors and potentially not having the same values or motivations behind the entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, I think a key part in every partnership is what you've said, the values, and being a values-driven organization ourselves, we always put that first in all the collaborations and partnerships that we embark on. So for me, where there's potential for misalignment, particularly in terms of interests, different parties coming around the table. So typically in an investment, you've got the founders and their interests. You've got existing investors that might have different instruments like safe notes, etc., that'll convert later. And then you have whoever's coming in on the round. And I've found where things have worked well is where all three parties are kind of rowing in the right direction. And it typically starts with putting the founder first and putting the startup first, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, right? And if the startup is successful and the founder is successful, then everybody's going to be successful. But where people sort of lead from their specific interest in terms of deal terms that are not necessarily founder friendly, or maybe short-term sort of thinking versus more of a longer-term partnership, it can lead to challenges down the line.
Nivesh, from your perspective and the guys playing on your left, playing a lot earlier, what are some of the things that you lament or frustrations that you're seeing in terms of cap tables by the time the investments get to your stage? And what are some of those obstacles or challenges that are then in place that prevent you from then executing on an investment at that stage?
Yeah, where do I start? A lot. Nah, just kidding. I think probably one of the biggest challenges coming in later stage is, we all want to back founder-led businesses. And given the lack of capital on the continent, and specifically in South Africa, to raise any meaningful amount of money, that means you need to give up a significant part of the business. So generally, when we're coming in, we see founders with 20% equity in a business before we're investing. And that makes it really difficult for us to finance a business because we're partnering with the founder long term, and your incentive is, by the time we exit or potentially exit, you've got a tiny piece of this business. What is your motivation every day to go through hell, to run through brick walls, to deal with terrible customers, right? And if you don't have that as a founder, then it's very unlikely that you're going to be successful, and therefore we won't be successful. So cap table and founder shareholding is always a massive challenge. I would say also, just back to your point, Bakang, is alignment. I mean, every different capital provider, every different entrepreneur support organization, every different founder that participates in a business have different interests and different values, like you mentioned. And trying to align all of those things is a lot easier said than done. Earlier stage founders, earlier stage investors generally will have an instrument that's a safe of some note, and you're driving the founder to raise at the highest valuation, right? Because that's your incentive. The founder is trying to just get cash in the door so that we can continue operating, and that misalignment is probably a challenge. And then you come, us third party coming in and trying to change everything and how the business is run. So it's really, really difficult, to be honest. And that's why I think not only the funding winter, the lack of capital that's available, the difficulty in dealing with, in SA, most businesses have to deal with SA corporates if you're trying to scale in the South African market, and that's probably one of the most difficult things to do. So it's really difficult to be a founder in this market, but at the same time, I think, we all mentioned here, we've all started raising funds or just started closing funds, and South Africa still remains one of the biggest markets on the continent with probably, one of the least difficult macro environments, right? If you look at Nigeria, is a difficult place, to put it lightly, right now, right? Kenya, one of the most stable currencies in the market, has devalued 50% this year. So although it's really difficult, I actually think South Africa, despite a tough regulatory environment, still proves an exciting place to be a founder and attract capital. So hopefully that plays out.
Awesome. Lumka, so listening to some of the things that the guys are talking about, and you spoke about earlier around allocating capital to more experienced fund managers, a shift in the second fund from the first fund. So you've seen a lot of pitch decks for funds come across your table. Because you're only investing in South Africa, are you finding it difficult to find differentiation within the fund managers that you're backing? And what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of fund focus coming across the table?
I think differentiation is a difficult thing because a lot of the teams are looking at the general funds, right? General tech funds. And so there isn't very many sector-specific funds. We have a biotech fund, which we've supported. We have the University Technology Transfer Fund. Those are quite specific propositions which we chose to sort of support in our first fund. I think with this new fund, differentiation really then just becomes about the teams, the traction that they've had, the experience that they've had, the ability to source deals, because when you're investing pensioners' money, you got to be a little bit extra careful because they want to see the money come back, right? And so I think really the differentiation comes in terms of teams, because that's who we're backing, right? We're backing the teams that can go the whole, can work together, have worked together for a long time, are tapped in and have the pulse on the things that they say they do, and I suppose things like systems in place. I think in South Africa, a lot of the funds have sort of been early stage. They're also startups in a way themselves, right? And so I think as we're looking at these more experienced teams, you want to start to see, do they have the right systems in place, reporting. It just becomes harder for us as well, because we're now reporting on sort of very strict principles. And you want to start to see funds that are able to match along the way. And yes, a lot of it will require, I think, just by definition, investing in South African VC means there's a lot of hand-holding, and we're trying to develop the system with some of the programs we've put in place in terms of, for example, we've had the Fund Manager Development Program, which is really a partnership with SAFCA, which is really to say the early stage managers, how do we get those managers up and running in a way where they can start to differentiate themselves, they can raise capital. And so I think in terms of differentiation, it really does boil down to the team and the skills that have in place.
That's a very important point. So even as an investor, you're backing individuals, right? Because I think the environment can change, the economy can change. And so I know that the investors are seeing that as well. So in terms of the biggest risks in investing, and I'll put that I'll start with Matthew. What are the biggest risks in this ecosystem that you're seeing?
Yeah, there's a lot of risks, right? But I think one that is super important, or actually two, I might go into two. Is one is, I would say, openness between investors and founders is a really important piece, right? So I mean, once you sort of invest, you sort of formalize that relationship. But as an investor, sometimes if you don't know what's happening, you also don't know how to provide support, right? And yet you sort of pride yourself in providing that support. It's the value add. And when investors think of their due diligence, it's about like, what can we uniquely add or do to uniquely add value to you as a founder? So sometimes if we don't actually know enough, it's very difficult. And just, yes, I think that's sort of the openness piece. I would say another risk or challenge is on openness and building that relational capital, even outside of just the investing realm. So oftentimes with the portfolio companies that we have, it is you have your VCs that you really make happy and have a great relationship with, but then there's also your corporates, there's also your clients, private SMEs, and there's also government. So government's super complex, and David touched on that. So with government, yes, it's an enabler, but also government can also be your customer, and government can also be your supporter, all right? So building that relationship with government is something that a lot of founders don't necessarily start off early enough, or actually don't even know how to start that relationship early enough. And you often find that as you scale from province to province, you need that government support, and government as a support. And as you scale from one market to the other, government is the one that pulls you in most cases. So I would say openness with VCs, but also that relational capital that you need to start super early is important.
Interesting. Sorry, very interesting. I actually, you're raising a point that was also part of the presentation, which was David spoke about 50% of a lot of the funds into SA coming from outside of South Africa. Lumka, how have you been able to convince governments and other institutional investors to support SA Inc. In terms of this ecosystem?
I mean, we've had a really great relationship with government, particularly the DSI and some of their agents through TIA. And a lot of that is, I think what he said, it's relational capital. It's spending time educating them. I think in our fundraise, we've spent a lot of time with the teams at the DSI, bringing them to these sort of events, because sometimes they just don't get the same exposure to the issues on the ground that people are feeling. And so it is a lot of time spent with the government agents teaching. We've managed to secure some of our funding for our first fund through the DSI. But also, I think there's an appreciation where they've given us capital to run in some of their projects, where they've given the same sort of capital to other people to disperse, and they've seen that we've been able to deliver it more efficiently, more quickly. It's able to get down to the ground, and then be able to report back on that. So government becomes a really, really important partner, I think, in making sure that this ecosystem works well. I mean, what we know is that government spends a lot of money on things like incubators and accelerators, but I suppose it's sort of getting them to understand that the kind of KPIs you put around those incubators will result in what you get. So a lot of it is about throughput, right? You get a lot of throughput and a lot of people going through accelerators and incubators, but never really being able to be measured. At the end of this program, are you able to raise capital, right? We've also then partnered with government in terms of understanding from a funding point of view, how they can use their capital to leverage private capital. So in our debt fund, which the Gauteng government put 100 million as first loss capital, we get that as the SSME fund with 100 million, and the IDC put additional capital. That fund is running and is running really well. The loss rates are nothing like other government institutions are seeing. And I think it's when they start to see the traction that there's an interest. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa, he indicated in his speech that they are now willing to put a first loss facility into the SSME fund, where we are supposed to leverage that. It's government, it takes a long time, but they're starting to understand where the levers are. But I think where government can play a big role is leveraging their capital, getting capital to come into the market, because I think it's clear that we run efficient systems. We're able to meet the demands that they're wanting to put in place for their voting base, right? And so there are better and smarter ways of achieving that without necessarily putting up systems and doing it yourself through some of the systems that they have.
So for Bakang and for Nivesh, before we open it up to the audience and the people, what would you say would be, other than fintech, which has obviously dominated our continent because access to finance and making it efficient, finance more efficient, what are some of the other trends that you're seeing emerging from startups? So what are some of the interesting startups you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think David mentioned it earlier. Something that's super topical right now is just climate tech. Unfortunately, we're not a climate tech fund, so we can't really invest there. Maybe we can. I mean, there's a reason for that. LPs are really looking for climate tech funds. That means funds are raising for climate tech. That means there's a lot of opportunity for startups to solve massive problems with the climate crisis that we have, whether that be across electric mobility, off-grid clean energy, water and sanitation. So that's stuff that we're seeing a lot of interesting startups coming about, especially on the African continent. And the reason for that is just because there's a plethora of capital looking for that now, which gives founders a lot more comfort and a little bit of a safety net to go and start a business in that space, because you'll be able to attract a bit more capital.
I think on our side, moving away from fintech, which is the obvious one, we're seeing quite a lot of interesting business models around broken sort of value chains, whether it's ag tech. I mean, South Africa obviously has an incredible mature agriculture sector, but when you filter down to sort of the entire logistics value chain, there's room for innovative models, leveraging tech to really manage that entire process better and more efficiently. And I think, Africa being sort of the breadbasket of the world, but struggling with really inefficient models that predate quite a lot of modern tech. There's a massive opportunity there, and I think some underinvestment. And the same for sort of the food infrastructure, retail, particularly in the township sort of economy. We're seeing quite a lot of interesting models coming out of that space.
Awesome. I'm just cognizant that, I don't want to lose you guys. So do we have any questions from the audience with regards to, please make your your questions broad enough for everybody. Don't ask Nivesh why he didn't return your email. So awesome. I think we've got a question over there.
How's it, guys? Thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate it. My name is Prince. Remember me as the cool dudes with the shades in the first conversation. But no, on a serious note, the question that I had really, it actually piggybacks off one of the earlier questions that were asked around how do we bridge trust? I think it's a critical question to answer, specifically within the South African funding ecosystem. Trust is a big issue. We know it. I don't think we should run away from it. But I think platforms like these enable us to facilitate those honest sort of conversations so that we can empower each other with tools to navigate it. I think for a lot of like Black African founders, it's difficult for them to access particular networks, whether it's because they didn't go to the right school or didn't have the sorts of relationships. So I think it's one of the key questions I'm interested to find out as VCs. How do you make yourself more accessible to those sorts of entrepreneurs? Obviously, making sure that you're not going through a ton of pitch decks that actually don't add value to you in the context of your job, because you also have very important jobs to do in terms of finding deals. So I think it's more like an ecosystem question in that particular regard. And then the second question embedded in that is, one of the key points that was raised was the issue of maybe you don't have enough traction. What does the right traction look like? What revenue number do you typically look at when you say, okay, let's do the right sort of, let's do an early stage ticket size? Is it $20,000? Is it $50,000? Is it $200,000? Because a lot of people don't know when it's the right time to start raising or approaching you. So I think those are just like two questions that I think are positive for the ecosystem to think about.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, just to re-emphasize here, the truth is that if we look at the numbers that David shared, even deeper, you'd see that not enough majority goes to actually non-African CEOs, and also to, it's even grimmer if you look at what it is for female-founded startups, right? And that's the reality that we face. I think for us, we're sort of, at Future Africa, we are, our team is predominantly African, which also sort of gives us, I think we forego that hurdle of the unconscious bias that other funds sort of experience in their investment decision making. And for us, the truth is that it's very difficult for us to actually invest in a CEO that's not African, because we believe that if you don't have the right context of the market that you're entering, it's going to be super, super difficult to build your business. And also, you need that bit of resiliency in that local market to actually build something that grows into its unicorn status, right? But I do see that there often is that mismatch between representation of who makes the decisions and also the funders, and also just, it's difficult for startups just to know who to talk to and get into the right room at the right time. I mean, there's this event that we have here, right? But there's not so many that take in sort of the broader community, because people are actually building, and that's the truth, people are building solutions. They're not really sure of who to go to, right? And that sort of also comes on the founder side to actually find a way in which to find the right networks, but also on the investor side is to broaden your landscape and actually have specific hard set metrics that you track to actually address this. So for us, also incentivized by our LPs, our limited partners, it is how many female founded startups do you invest in? And we have a certain metric to keep track of. It has to be like our targets to make it at least 50%, and it's just underneath that. But that's something that we think about whenever we think of an investment. We think of that as a decision-making criteria. And I think over time, we'll also have more females that are making the decisions in our investment committee meetings, and those will also influence it. So over time, it will go, but I think an interim solution is to have these hard set sort of metrics that you track to ensure that you also remove that unconscious bias as investors.
So it's interesting, and I'll ask Nivesh to answer this one, aligned with the Prince asking. So David had a saying, likes like, right? And so are you seeing that play out in your portfolio and the demographics within your portfolio?
What do you mean, like in terms of?
The type of founders that you're backing.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe just a point back to what you said, and I think it's important, is diversity on an investment team would allow us to then invest into diverse businesses, whether it be racial, where you're based, your economic upbringing, and your gender, right? So our team, our managing partner, and our GP's base is majority female. All of our team members are 100% African, which means then we can have a landscape or a view to back local businesses with local founders and female founders. That doesn't necessarily translate though, because we have one business out of 5 that has a female founder in the founding team. And we can go into the detail of that, but there's a lot of history around that. But to your point, I think one of the starting points around how do we make ourselves more accessible is coming to events like this, getting involved with a lot more startup accelerator incubator programs, working with Ant and the Ventures 54 team when they have events and are doing research, because that means that we're giving our input in and hopefully are becoming a lot more accessible to his network of founders and the E Squared network of founders. There is always a limit in terms of how much you can do, for sure, but I think it is important being accessible. And the point around having a diverse team is, I think it's almost 100% true. If we've got a female investment team member, it's more likely a female founder is going to want to reach out and feel that that investment team member is accessible. It's the same if I'm not white, a non-white founder should feel a little bit more accessible to me. So I think that's an important point to get funding across our diverse landscape of African founders.
So
can I just add something to that? I think additionally, capital yields a lot of power. And I think when we put together some of these metrics as capital providers, a lot of it is to then force the teams to find ways. And so if your team isn't diversified, what's the runway if you're raising a certain fund size before you get a team member that is female? We appreciate there's difficulties in sort of forming teams and putting people together, but I think people can make concerted efforts at junior levels, whether it's making sure there's an associate. We're on the Mastercard Foundation, they're really, really actually specific about a GDI lens on their investment, and it's to say we're giving you capital, but we can also ask for some of these changes to be implemented as part of your investment strategy.
Bakang, are you going to take the question with how much should
Yeah,
they be
sure.
making?
Let me take that thorny question. Not that thorny, actually, and it's quite a good question. So I would say, and David touched on this on his presentation, about really doing your research about what you're building, what stage you're at as a founder, and who would be the right partner for the stage that you're at on the investment side, right? So if you're very early, chances are you're product focused and you probably need a little bit of capital to just show some proof points to be able to get to the next step of funding, maybe pre-seed. And in that instance, a lot of the guys that I see that might be slightly earlier for us, I do try to connect them with sort of angel investors or accelerators like Ingenie, who can provide that non-capital support as well, or mentorship from experienced founders that have built similar businesses. And then, very clearly knowing that I need X amount of capital to hit these particular milestones. And if I do that, I'll probably be very attractive for the next stage investor, whether pre-seed, seed, and so forth. So I think that is super important to think of your business or your startup in those terms. And on our side, part of what I enjoy doing is helping founders that that might not necessarily be ready for investment from E4E because of the stage or just different, metrics that aren't quite there yet, to sort of think through that a little bit, and connect them to whether it's partners, investors, angel investors that could actually help them reach those milestones.
So we've given you 23 seconds back. So we are going to be here all day. Please take the opportunity to engage with the guys. Lumka unfortunately needs to leave, so if you're raising a fund, you can walk it. I'm joking. She's going to be out. But please engage with the guys on the stage for as long as they're here, and let's see how we can crowd more capital into the space and for your ventures. Thank you, guys.
To our panel members, we really appreciate all the insight that you've given to us as investors and also as entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the point of the program where we're going to eat. I'm sure by now you guys are hungry. So without wasting any time, I just want to make an announcement with regards to where you will find the food. So could you please go downstairs? The facility's name it's the Members Lounge. So you'll just go downstairs to the Members Lounge, and then that's where you will find your food. And then after that, I was just going to request that if you are part of the panel conversation that's happening after lunch, could you please come back at 2:10 so that you can get mic'd up. And then, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we're going to be having an amazing discussion. I'm really excited about this discussion, and I think it was points that were also made as our investors were having the conversation over here. So this conversation will be around prioritizing women-focused funding and investment support. Okay, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys can leave the facility and go and make sure. Can you guys please just be back at, is it 2:15? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. Can we all just settle down, please, and be seated? Can we please take our seats? Spelele, I'm naming and shaming you, Chief. Thank you, everybody. We are back for our second panel conversation. And the theme for the second panel conversation is prioritizing women-focused funding and investment support. And our moderator for the second panel conversation will be Onkgopotse Khumalo from Pocket Couch.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to just structure this a little bit differently because Nadia can only join us for a short while. So we're going to do a quick intro to Nadia and get a little bit of insight from her, and then we'll do an intro to the rest of our panel. So a little bit unconventional. But as a startup founder, we know that we got to hustle and pivot as much as we can. So hi, Nadia, thank you for joining us. So I think a couple of us may know her. She is one of the co-founders of WomHub and also one of the co-founders of WomEng. She has a very illustrious profile. So one of the things that really struck me about her profile was her work in the gender and education space at the World Economic Forum, But I just want to ask her just one quick question about her profile that we kind of don't need to Google or can't Google or see on LinkedIn. So over to you, Nadia.
Hi, everybody, and great to connect with you this afternoon. And apologies that I can't stay for the entire session. So you want to know one thing that's not on my profile. So besides all the companies that I founded, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I don't share this quite often, but I'm also a mom of two boys. I've got a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old who's I feel like he's going on 16. And so for me, the question around how do we get an equal world and an equitable world for all, it becomes really important. They say kind of higher powers have a sense of humor because they give feminist voice so we can raise the next generation better. So that's what you don't find on my LinkedIn bio.
I'd encourage you to put it on your LinkedIn profile as well, because it's quite a monumental feat to be a mother. But maybe one of the questions I'd like to ask you is around, in your work with WomHub and WomEng, so specifically WomHub, you've done a lot of partnerships with, say, Standard Chartered, a Richard Branson Foundation, and the like. What are some of the things you're seeing around, the kinds of support that the ecosystem gives to women? And where do you think the major gaps are between that kind of support versus support that the ecosystem gives to male startup founders? Maybe just give us like
Sure.
one or two gaps that really stand out for you.
So firstly, to be honest, we've had to build this entire ecosystem. So what WomHub does is over the last 2 decades, we've been building talent, so female engineering and tech talent. Over the last 8 years, building female founders in STEM businesses, and for us, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mining, manufacturing. We've just built innovation spaces. So we've partnered with Cisco as a large tech company to be able to democratize access to deep and new technologies, both hardware and software. And then the last is venture capital. And the VC part is really interesting for us because none of this matters if you can't move money into the hands of women entrepreneurs. While we worked with a range of really interesting companies who at the heart of what they're doing believe in the opportunity to support and invest in women entrepreneurs, is still a long way to go. Only 2% of VC dollars have gone to female founders on the continent. Some of the challenges is really at an very early stage investment, and that's because people invest into people who know, look like them, sound like them, who they like and trust. And so if you don't have a very wide network, if you don't have people with deep pockets, if you don't have, the friends, family, fools who are going to invest in you as an early stage founder, it's so much harder for you. And when we see, women, people of color don't have that particular support, they haven't been on, incredible programs or whatever, they're just hustling from the beginning, that journey for them is so much harder. The raising capital is so much harder. And that's really what we've been trying to do on the capital side now, is we've built this entire ecosystem. All the needs are there, all the pieces are there, but the money isn't. And if you think, being a startup founder is hard, being a fund manager, especially a first-time female fund manager, is even harder, right? Because you now have got to convince people to give you money so that you can give it to entrepreneurs who are different and a little bit divergent to their mandates. And so those are some of the key pieces. And honestly, if I had a magic wand, I would just put a whole lot more money into female fund managers, female founders. I've said this on a number of panels, just let's stop talking about it. Let's just write the damn checks. And the reason being is you'll see a higher ROI when you're investing in female founders. Female founders typically hire more people, they hire more women, their numbers are more solid, their growth is better. And so, the data doesn't lie. And we've now starting to get really great data around what happens when we actually invest in women entrepreneurs. And they plow that money back. I've said this a number of times. It feels like our money does like yoga, Pilates, or whatever, because it can stretch way beyond. And so we're really stretching those dollars because, it's scarce. And when we do get it, we make it work.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. I'm curious about, obviously I'm mindful of time, but one of the things that you mentioned is the data doesn't lie, right? So, I mean, being in the mental health care space, trying to convince organizations around the case or the investment case for mental well-being, it resonates with me, right? So we know that women, invest or rather have more women on their teams, they hire more people. We also know, like you said, that women-owned businesses are more capital efficient. So if we see that the data tells us this and that the ROI is typically higher, what do you think needs to be done? So if the data is there, what other things need to be done for people to just write the damn checks?
And for me, it's around taking a different approach, right? So some of the things we've done is get more women to move capital themselves, women decision makers. We started something called the 35 Club, which actually created more women investors. Because even though the data is there, again, it's around who do I know, like, and trust with my money, right? And so how do we start to create those bridges, and then bring on male champions, because men are completely part of this conversation. It's not just the thing around gender lens, female founders, female fund managers. It's not a woman's problem. It's an everybody's problem. When we get diversity, equity, inclusion right, we all win. And so how do we get everybody involved? And it's been interesting because a lot of the time we're seeing men who go, oh, I have daughters, so I want to invest in this for my daughter's sake. So we're seeing lots of dads come to us and go, how do I support this? Because I want my daughter to have an easier path in life. And that gives me hope. That makes me optimistic.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the insights. I think I particularly like the idea that, or rather the reality that women don't exist in a vacuum, right? So if we don't have allies, if we don't have sponsors, the conversation really won't move because the majority of capital allocators are men and decision makers in the spaces are men. I'm going to leave it there because I know you have a hard stop. So thank you for your time, and I'll introduce the next panelists.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to introduce our in-person panelists, who most of you know. So, I mean, I think Dineo and I have recently become quite close navigating this health tech startup journey. We've sat on or been on an accelerator together, and more recently attended a conference together. So she is a Cambridge master's, which I love to hype her up about, in nanotechnology. Is that right? Yeah. I'm just like these big words. And she's building an amazing kind of health tech startup around bridging the gap between, around the inequities in the healthcare system. And she's also had a lot of experience having to pivot and having to kind of rethink her strategy. So really looking forward to your perspective as a startup founder. I'm also going to then introduce our other panelist. I don't know if we can get Sybil and Melanie on the screen. Melanie. Hi. Okay, so Melanie, what I really like about your profile is that you're the chairperson of the Joburg Ballet. So I love that. It's not something we kind of speak about, kind of our lives outside of our profiles on LinkedIn. Melanie has had a wealth of experience in the investment fund management space. She's also been involved with Savka and a range of kind of capital allocator perspective. I guess we can really find out from her, being a non-exec director with Grovest, and I think a director with Gend Equity, which I'm also curious about. I don't know if Sybil is going to join us as well. I want to just do the introduction. Okay, she won't be joining us. So welcome, Melanie, and welcome, Dineo. So I'm curious about this. We speak about the 2% of VC funds have gone to women-owned businesses. We speak about there's something around, from a capital allocator perspective, I read some data from Disrupt Africa that said 6% of angels were women, and only like less than 40% of VCs investing in African startups had at least one female founding partner, right? So there's this talk around, or this reality around, capital allocators and people who are in that position are, best positioned to move the needle. But I'm curious around from the other perspective, right? We say less than 10% of startups are woman founded. And I'm not so sure that that's true, right? So I feel like it can sometimes be a cop-out to say, well, where are the women founders? So in my network alone, I mean, if you want a list of 30 really great startups that are founded by women, I have it on Airtable. I'm building this database. So why do we think that, women-founded startups don't exist? Even that data point for me, I have a question mark around it. So maybe I'll pass that on to Melanie. Melanie, we can't hear you. So can you just unmute, I think? Still can't hear you. Have you unmuted? Oh, okay. Okay, let's try again. Are we good? No. Oh, no, we're not good. Okay. Okay, well, while you unmute yourself. Yeah, well, maybe you can answer the question. So from the perspective of a startup founder, woman-founded startup, you obviously are immersed in communities and community spaces. And what's your perception around whether or not that is true and my challenging that data point?
I mean, look, there definitely are female entrepreneurs, and even within our own circle, we've come across a number of them. I think the challenge is really the visibility, obviously, and also being able to, expose yourself, go for pitching competitions, speak to various investors to try and get the support that we need. Outside of our community, I think we're actually quite privileged as Allen Gray Fellows in the sense that I think, Allen Gray Orbis as a whole has invested a lot in us making sure that we're confident, making sure that we have exposure to the right communities and right networks as well. Also ensuring that we have access to entrepreneurial education where you can confidently go up and pitch your business idea, approach investors. There are a lot of people who actually don't have that kind of network of support. So the women that I have come across outside of our network are people with very brilliant ideas, but it's just a lack of confidence, or they second guess whether the idea is good enough, if it's something that actually has legs, right? And one thing I've also seen is that there's definitely a dropout when it comes to age. So there were a lot of us when we were in our 18s and 20s who are vying for this entrepreneurship life and startup life, and we know that it can also be very difficult, especially when you're still building up. There might be months where you don't go with the salary, but once you go over the age of 30 and you start getting married and you start having children, you make a very different decision based on what it is that you want to achieve. So it's really unfortunate that in my personal space, I've seen that drop off take place because of those kind of decisions that women have to make. But I do believe that the women are there. They just need to get the exposure. They need to be able to, get the right support as well, and just really, get the right champions around them to also get them to believe in their ideas. Get more women who also invest in these businesses. I think the other day we had a conversation about how awesome it is that you've got a network of female-owned VC funds, or VCs that essentially are, would be ready and willing to invest in women-started businesses. So we need those kind of networks to let the other female entrepreneurs know that we're actually not alone and that there's a lot of support that is around them.
Right. Yeah, I think I like the point around visibility and social capital because it's a real thing, right? Investment capital is one thing, but social capital is another. So as, a woman founder who has, we were talking the other day about conference and panel burnout. I mean, we've been to panel after conference after, and I think October to December is peak season. I think there's Africa Tech next week, there's Super Return. And so we're putting ourselves out there. But is there something to be said about perhaps the way we're building those networks or the environments in which we are immersing ourselves? Are they the right ones? Because I know a lot of female founders that are attending conferences and are, trying to get warm introductions, etc., etc. So I don't know if Melanie is back, and maybe
I am definitely back.
Yay! Melanie, hi again. Yeah, do you want to maybe just answer the first question, if you remember what it is around, I actually don't even think I remember what it was. But the second question around social capital and, is there a gap around how, as women, we're navigating the spaces to build social capital? And if there isn't, then what is the problem around visibility?
So maybe let's go back to your first question, which was really, is it true that the female entrepreneurs don't exist? So what's going on in the system that we're not seeing them if they do exist? And if I look a little bit worse for wear, apologies, I took a flight in overnight to Cairo and then got the option to go and walk and see some ancient mosques, which I then did. But I'm so nauseous at the moment, I can't see straight. So I apologize in advance. And I guess that tells you where women are in their lives, right? We just stoic. We just do everything. If it's an opportunity, we'll take it. And that's why I think a lot of us are burnt out. If I look at just whether the female entrepreneurs exist or not, they exist. Part of the problem is that the decision makers, and Nadia referred to this, the decision makers who are more likely to see these entrepreneurs don't exist wholesomely in the market. So that is one of the reasons SAFCA's members a couple of years ago said, look, we've got to start looking at this mid-tier, which is the capital allocators at a fund manager level perspective, because unless we change what those fund managers look like, we're going to consistently sit with this problem where, whether it's conscious or unconscious, fund managers are going to look for and find entrepreneurs who look like them, and that's just human nature. So it's not a criticism. It's just harder if you're not there. So that was really important. SAFCA has done a lot of work over the last couple of years to do that. And I'm not trying to garner empathy for fund managers, but I think Nadia also referred to it. A fund manager in itself are entrepreneurs, right? So they have a hell of a lot of hard work to do in terms of trying to get capital allocators or limited investors, as we refer to them, to invest in them or pool their funds with them so that they can, in fact, make this difference that all the female entrepreneurs out there are looking for them to make. And they face a lot of barriers in doing that. So the research that I've done for SAFCA, for USAID, for other organizations, really reflects that women generally have a harder time in their discussions with capital allocators. So if you just take away all the other things around women doing 110,000 things at the same time, i.e. making sure the kids are get to school on time, extended family members are healthy and taken care of, they tend to be put through longer due diligence processes, as well as be asked questions that, again, maybe subconsciously, unconsciously, limited partners or capital allocators wouldn't necessarily ask of a male managed team or a male owned team. So those prejudices do still exist in the market. And on top of having to deal with all the other social pressures that come with being a woman, a lot of fund managers have to deal with that as well. And it's not all negative. As I said, a lot of research has been done on this topic. EPPF also recently came out with a report in conjunction with Gibbs. I think there is a recognition of the importance of decision makers at a very top tier, which is at an asset allocator level. And you think about your pension funds and your other funder funds, that there needs to be intentional allocation of funding to female-owned and managed fund managers, so that there can be intentional allocation into female-owned and managed businesses, which I do believe exist. So if I think about, to get to your second question, if I think about some of the things that women potentially do differently around building up social capital than men do, there are things I think women could do better, and then I think there are things that also systemically make it harder for women to build up social capital. So if I just think about just systemic issues, a lot of women will start out a career early at the same level than their male counterparts, and then for various reasons they won't get the type of career opportunities that their male counterparts get, and that could be for various reasons, whether it's family responsibility or unconscious bias. What that generally then implies is that women generally get paid less than men. And as a result, when you think about a woman going to start off her own business and or start her own fund management business, she's already on the back foot because she had less, she earned less than a male counterpart. And I think potentially one of the other things that play into that is she potentially has a whole network of individuals that are in addition reliant on her, whether it's extended family, children, or otherwise, which also eats into that actual physical capital. If I think about things that women can do better, is we can be more confident. Women use words like, I think I can, or I'm going to try to, or because we are honest creatures. I can guarantee you when your male counterpart goes and asks for capital, they don't go, I think I can. They go, here's what I'm going to do for you, right? So I think women tend to undervalue themselves, which then leads to a perceived undervaluation coming back at them. I think also women have become better more recently, but I think women need to also not just support themselves better, but also the time, and I know this is another thing on women's plates that they don't need, but to really build on the networks that their male allies that they will find along the way have. So part of having a male ally is not just that male ally reaching out to you and he thinks he can do something for you. It's also about you being brave enough to ask. Ask for what you need and want. That particular ally in your network might not have that particular skill set or knowledge, but I can guarantee you he probably has access to it somewhere else. So we probably need to ask just a little bit louder and more intentional.
Yeah, thank you for that, Melanie and Danelle. I think, what stood out for me, Melanie, was around how there's a correlation between us undervaluing ourselves and therefore the undervaluation of our, I suppose, our startups in our context, and also the dropout as you kind of traverse your landscape and family responsibilities, marital responsibilities come to the fore. And we're no stranger to the fact that the mental load for women kind of increases as you kind of progress through your life stages. So that is something that is really challenging and is systemic. What I want to double down on is the male allyship perspective. So I think my question is around if we were kind of to flip the perspective and say, as an ally or somebody who identifies as an ally, if you are, listening to this conversation, but you're not an allocator of capital, right? What are some of the practical things they could do to kind of change the landscape? And very practical. So I think we often think, these allies are, if we could just get in rooms where people are allocating capital and, that'll really change the game. But what do you think, having navigated fundraising and building your startup, have you had allies that have vouched for you or have done really practical things outside of writing a check? And how did that move the needle for you?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So most recently, we, through a friend, got an introduction to someone who works for a really big corporate that we were trying to approach. And this guy was, and still is, essentially our ally. I mean, he introduced us basically to his whole team. And because of that, they were actually willing and willing to make the time to hear our pitch and to hear about like what it is that we want to do and how we want to partner with them. And I don't think that without this person necessarily like championing for us, that would have happened. So we definitely need those people who will give us access to introductions and also access to markets, because you can have a really good idea, but you know, money talks at the end of the day. We need those people who will be able to sign the checks, or at least you know, vouch for us in rooms where those people can be able to sign the checks. So that's something that's been really important from our side. And again, I think, you know, it's also important for us to be able to really just build those networks. You know, sometimes we go to cocktail events or, you know, whether it's a conference, and you tend to gravitate to people also who look like you, who sound like you, or maybe even like women, and you don't really put yourself out there. I think even the last time when we spoke, I was like, Onks, you actually need to get, you know, look for someone who looks completely different to you. Go get, you know, a white Afrikaans man to be your mentor. You never know what kind of insight and a different perspective that he can give you, because a lot of the times, you know, we want to gravitate towards people who look like you, and that particular person might even be able to open doors that you wouldn't even be able to imagine. So I think it's also a matter of us just really putting ourselves out there, you know, going against what we would naturally gravitate towards, because those people could be potential gatekeepers or gate openers for you and your business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it's really true. Kind of, we tend to kind of gravitate towards people who look like us or who have similar operate in similar contexts as us. And I remember that day after you said that, this is also the power of having friends in your community, entrepreneurial community spaces. I pretty much spent an hour talking to a white Afrikaans farmer called Willem. And, you know, there was some really, really good, really practical things that came out of that conversation. So pushing ourselves to do that is really important. I think just before I kind of flip to Q&A, something that I don't think we talk about often in the VC kind of startup space is navigating the space around approaching male allyship relationships. So there is sometimes a tension, and I don't want to say not all men, because that is also controversial. But I, for instance, have had, you know, instances where, you know, I've asked for introductions, or I've tried to create relationships in the sphere of building social capital, and I've been asked for something in exchange, right? And which is completely unrelated to the ask. So against that backdrop, which is a reality, and whether you're operating in a corporate space or even an NGO space, Melanie, how would you advise, you know, women founders to navigate that landscape, right? Because it's a reality wherever we find ourselves. What are the red flags we should look out for, right? Because oftentimes it's like the check writers who you least expect, or the people who you least expect. And then it comes down to you, I suppose, in many instances around what your values are and what you're willing to give up or not give up.
I think it's a difficult one, but the first thing to accept that it's not you, right? It's got nothing to do with you. If you get asked for a quid pro quo, which is unrelated to your ask, and I know this is going to sound really, really difficult, but I need to walk away, right? You need to call it, say no very definitely, and explain yourself clearly, and walk away. I know that, but I think that is doable if you also reach out to women and other male allies in your network. I think it's important that when you are placed in that position, you actually reach out to others in your network. And that's why it's important that you need to surround yourself with strong, and you need to surround yourself with male allies, so that they can help you navigate what can potentially be not just a very difficult and complex situation to navigate from an emotional perspective, but also from a potential growth perspective as an entrepreneur, or as a woman entrepreneur. So there's no good answer to it, I think, and every situation is going to be differently. But I think, just to summarize, it's not you. Call it out, have a recent discussion, which doesn't mean that you're going to submit to the behavior or that you're going to allow it to happen, and then surround yourself with those who can support you best in terms of navigating the saying no or rejecting the ask.
No, I just
Thanks,
wanted to
Melanie.
add that that's actually a very tricky position to be in. And it's really unfortunate because it, in essence, is, it limits the career or entrepreneurial progression of a lot of women. I've also been in those very tricky positions where, you genuinely asking for help and you genuinely, seeing this person as a potential gatekeeper, and yet they want something in return. And it's really, it's not a good position to be in, especially as a female entrepreneur. But one thing that I have realized that at least helps me is, being very clear on boundaries on the get-go. Look, it's not something that I've necessarily mastered as yet, but be very clear on boundaries. There's certain things where, if I can see someone is now calling me at 8 p.m. after hours.
Why are you
I
calling
don't
me
pick
after
up.
generations?
I'll rather, yes. I'd rather send a text message in the morning saying, sorry, I missed your call. I could be looking at your call, but, it's something that I won't take. Or, not putting myself in a position where I'm necessarily like completely alone with this person, where they can now explore these dubious conversations. So I think you also learn to read the room and just set those boundaries where people know that this is definitely a space that they cannot cross over. And if they do, you find a way to, tactfully withdraw, and then also seek help from, or the help that you need from someone else. And also back to Melanie's point is that this is actually one of the reasons why we need to empower women in all spheres, so that, we have an alternative to go to should you be in a position where you are, it's a potentially compromising situation for you. So we need those women in leadership positions. We need those women who are writing checks, who are going to open the gates for us. So that we can at least circumvent these very awkward situations, which I know a lot of women actually do find themselves in, of which we don't talk about enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Melanie and Danelle. I'm going to switch. I don't know why my time has been cut in half. But I'm going to switch over to Q&A if there are any other questions in the audience. But I think, to synthesize, we've spoken about social capital and being intentional in that sphere. We've spoken about the confidence deficit and how we need to really be intentional about building that and kind of speak very audaciously and boldly about what we can offer. We've also spoken about capital allocators and making sure that women are in places where they can make key decisions. Any other questions that can potentially build around solutioning? Let's go.
Firstly, thank you for being open and sharing your experiences. I think one of the things that I've been grappling with, and the team we've been asking ourselves, is understanding that women are not homogenous. That there's different women find themselves at different phases, different circumstances, and so what are the underlying support systems as funders, and I'm talking from a funder perspective, that we could implement or provide into the ecosystem to not necessarily make it easier, but to account for the nuances for women entrepreneurs and women and women fund managers that are raising funds.
Right. Thanks for the question. It's I think it's a good question because we can't be painted with the same brush. And I mean, as a mom, now I'm a mom, and so my needs and whatnot are different. So I'd say don't invite me to like 3 events in 1 week after 8 because that's like bedtime. Maybe, as a startup founder, having navigated different phases in your life, what do you think some solutions could be?
Yeah, I just think being intentional in providing, whether it's life coaching or mental health support, because I think it was Melanie who also mentioned that, we juggle so many things. I'm not a mom yet, but, I'm looking at, supporting my family in one way or another. So it's not just me and my business and hustling on my own. I'm also, just grappling with a lot of things that, might not necessarily, be of in your radar, but they're affecting how I essentially show up in the business. So definitely be intentional about, providing life coaching, mental health support, and just mentorship as a whole. I found that I've grown the most when I've been surrounded by other, highly successful businesswomen who I can tap into, creating like a network of, successful women that we can just reach out to and be like, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, Z. How did you navigate this 5 years ago? You'll probably save me a lot of time and a lot of pain if I have access to that network.
Yeah. I think that's a really good one. So if you're looking for mental health support for organizations, contact the Pocket Couch. And I think what's also important in that is like really being intentional about putting us in spaces that we otherwise would not have been or had exposure to, right? So, don't necessarily pair me with a woman mentor in your program because she looks like me or you think that she has a shared life experience. Put me in a room with people that I wouldn't have access to, had been navigating by myself. And yeah, so is there any other question, comment?
Hi, thank you. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job up there. I think for me, tying into what Gladwin said, I think I'm very passionate about it. But I think for me, it goes a little bit deeper because as young women entrepreneurs, you're going to have young women working for you. And this problem isn't just about you. It's about the people coming through as your employees and the greater society that you're impacting. And I think when we look at how we can support entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, for me, it's challenging because I don't quite know what the fix is. Because when we say we want to show up, treat me like you treat the man, give me as much money as you give the man, but actually I am different. I am female, but it doesn't mean that I am less successful as an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean that I'm weaker than you. It doesn't mean that I'm less intelligent than you. But it also talks to how do we help the entrepreneur to make sure that women that are working for us are being equally paid to the men, because they're also going to have the challenge of having children and having family responsibilities and being single moms. So I think the question that Gladwin was asking is I think one that deserves maybe a bigger conversation, and I think one that we need to have frankly. But I'm not sure that I've yet heard the answer to that. And until we answer that, how can we genuinely show up for female entrepreneurs and help them be the leaders to other women that they need to become?
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. I think I'm really bleak that time's up. But, that's a really good note to end off on because that speaks to the need for this broader conversation. And I hope that we can be allocated more time, but let's not let the conversation end here. Let's engage more meaningfully throughout the day or in the other spaces we find ourselves in, so that it really just doesn't end here and we're just kind of asking questions. Let's really solution. But yeah, I think thank you very much. Melanie is offline, but in her absence, thank you, Melanie, for joining. Janelle, thank you for your perspective, and thank you for engaging so meaningfully with the conversation and the content. And thank you, E-Squared, for the platform to have these conversations. I think Umkhoputsi and Rita, I am with you there. I do believe that we need a special lekgotla to discuss this topic. I think, there's no better word that I could have used besides lekgotla. It is a very systemic issue, and 45 minutes is not enough. Before coming on stage, I was speaking to Nkgopotse and she's like, no, 45 minutes is enough. She's like, in fact, it's a lot of time. And then she's the same person right now who's like, oh, guys, my time is up. But with that being said, thank you so much, ladies, for your time and the insight shared. Right now, I'm just going to ask, I love this panel. Wow, you guys literally read my mind. Sean, we're quite aligned. It shows that we're in the same team.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask them to come in front. So right now, we're just going to go into a 10-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. My request, in fact, I'll make it 11 minutes. The request is that you are seated at 3:15. You guys can just go outside, have conversations, let's engage, let's have fun, let's make new friends. And like we said, let's not speak to people who are like us. Can I please see different, like, I know who you were sitting with during lunch, so Ofenza, somebody else. All right, fantastic, thank you.
I'm going to introduce you. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Parazza. Okay. Thank you, everybody. We are now going to be going into our third panel discussion. And the theme for the third panel discussion is fundraising with E Squared. And this will be moderated by Sean Kutsia, who is an investment manager at E Squared and one of my favorite and one of the most funniest people at E Squared. Thank you.
All right. As you can see, we're all very excited. I started talking before the music stopped. But I'm going to say that very cliche thing, they saved the best for last. But this time it's true. So, yeah, if you guys can all give a round of applause to our panelists over here. I think also it's been an incredible day. We've had some really cool discussions. The event has been running like incredibly well. And I think, someone that we normally would have seen by now, but we haven't, sitting at the back there, Ords, shout out to you in an awesome event. All right, guys. So as Tim said, we've got a panel discussion, which is fundraising with E Squared. So I think the sort of operative part there is the fun as the fundraising. So it's something we like to try to do as we get capital out to the investee companies. So good afternoon to everyone formally. As ChatGPT put a lot more adjectives into my welcome, I'm going to kind of cut it short and just say, welcome to all the Alan Gray Fellows, our guests, our valued partners, and anyone who's gate crashing. There's a lot of snacks outside. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion, as I said, on fundraising with E Squared. And as Tim said, I'm Sean Kutsia, investment manager at E Squared, and I've actually worked with each one of the businesses and the fellows that we're seeing here. I think to tie into two of the previous discussions, the first one being the discussion that Gladwin hosted around just the ecosystem around different VCs, what we're seeing there. The one thing that resonated with me is that it is a proper partnership that you're getting into when you go and get money from a VC. And so what we try to do today is just to give you guys some insight as to what that process looks like and sort of what we are and how we look post-investment, because I think that's also a very different view, and it does go both ways. So as you go, okay, and then the second thing I wanted to tie into is that while the stats you saw there today were super stark in terms of gender-based funding and also with funding people of color, Melvin is going to be online at some point, I believe, but I think you'll see we acknowledge we're doing really well. And then, as you can see, Adila is here, so that you will be saying is one of four. And actually, no, Prince's co-founder is Kanya. And so, yeah, we are at 50% then in terms of that funding. So I think the stats and a lot of the time the data that you don't see, it's actually there. And I think we'd actually need to give a round of applause for that. So cool. So as everybody knows, E Squared is an impact investor that provides capital and non-financial support to entrepreneurs building sustainable and impactful businesses. So we believe that entrepreneurs are the catalyst for growth and what we need to see here, but everybody knows, and for growth, transformation, and social upliftment. But the one thing that I think we're all quite aware is that growing a business is not easy, and growing a business doesn't happen overnight. And so for that, you need to have a patient investor along your side and partner, and I think that that's something we pride ourselves on. So everyone that we see here today has either received funding in the last 12 months or is about to receive. I think Offense is sitting there and should be looking at some approvals, and we'll get the money flowing. But so shout out to Offense there, guys. He signs the checks. So we have a wide range of sectors and industries here, and I think it's just different stages of business as well. So I'd like to just introduce everyone. I know we had, Tim did a quick intro. We have Melvin, who's online. Mel, give us a little wave, thumbs up, smile. That's it. On my left, I've got Adila. Sorry, Mel's from Future Logistics, and I hope we don't have the mute issue we had previously, but Future Logistics. Adila is from Pele Energy Group. We then have Prince from Satana Capital. So our question guy in the audience. He was the one asking all the questions. And then Mvelo from Zio. So guys, I think the first, I could tell you what we're going to talk about, but I think I've already been speaking for a while. So let's get straight into it. So the first thing I'd like to do is just ask each one of you to give a little bit of a background to yourselves, your business, and then tell us one thing that we probably wouldn't know about you. So Adila, I'll just start with you and we can run through in that order.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your attention after lunch and all the panels. So I'm Adila Mayat. I studied engineering. I started my journey at Wits University as a fellow. I've always been drawn to the renewable energy sector. That's actually something that spoke to me when I was in matric. It just seemed cool, to be quite honest. And it felt really cool as well to have a new perspective on the energy sector, which is something that's really old. And within that newness of a new perspective to a very old sector is a lot of opportunity to do things differently, to democratize, to not have single owners of large infrastructure, but to actually have multiple owners, diverse owners. So that's just a little bit about me. The business I'm in is called Pele Energy Group, as Sean said. It's actually a business that I didn't found myself. It was founded in 2009 by some really young, excited, cool South Africans who decided to take on this world of energy and social change that comes with energy. And I'm sure we'll talk to it a bit later, but I've actually been supported by E-Squared to buy into this existing entity and become part of a growing SME. As opposed to sort of founding it myself. So I think there's a bit to kind of unpack around how that journey is a bit different to being a co-founder. It was really cool that E-Squared saw this perspective and then started building a model around it, because the industry that I'm in is capital intensive. To start from scratch, for the sake of starting from scratch, if you don't have a different perspective, felt daunting and felt like something that wasn't necessary, but rather to leverage off and to find a space where others have come before you and started doing some of the really early building blocks really made this kind of journey and where I'm at possible. So that's really great. The one thing that people don't know about me, I'm going to go with, in this landlocked Gauteng, I actually still find a way to surf. I'm a surfer. Yeah, and I'm going to pass over to the next one from there. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Adila.
Hi, guys. My name is Prince. I'm the co-founder of a business called Satana Capital. Satana, like I mentioned, is a working capital finance fintech business that works with wholesalers in effect. So we partner with wholesalers to be able to fund informal traders within the townships in SA. So we utilize the credit scoring, the data from their trading history, analyze it, come up with a credit amount, load it in the wholesaler system. We then fund that amount and the person pulls it out as stock. They repay that over 14 days. We charge a 2% margin on it. And that's what we do. That's fun and exciting.
Guys, just so you know, we have got this recorded. So someone starts the same thing that is given away exactly how it's business. We have it recorded.
Let them try. So, shout out. Anywho, long story short, I'm deeply passionate about the informal sector. Really believe that there's such huge opportunity and wide spaces for impact, for development and innovation, specifically within financial services, and uplifting individuals who ordinarily wouldn't be able to access financial services. One thing comrades Achi on these streets don't know about your boy is that he writes songs. Oh. So yeah, that's it. Cool.
Nice.
Cool.
Hey everyone, so my name is Umvelo Hlope, founder of Zayo. So we basically teach people how to code. We teach digital skills online, and then we help our alumni and our graduates to get their first job or their first opportunity of employment post all of our programs. Naturally, I was born, to two teachers, so I'd naturally find myself then, I guess, in the edtech space. One thing people don't know about me, I think before moving to Joburg, I'd never tasted acha in my life. But when I met my girlfriend earlier this year, she got me into all of that. And now I'm a delivery man for acha on the weekends. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Umvelo. And I think, guys, we'll be taking some orders afterwards. So just as you leave, there'll be a form. Mel, thanks. Over to you.
No, thank you very much. And Umvelo, if you're looking to send any acha across Africa, our company can support you in that regard. It's Future Logistics. I guess everyone, Marvin Lepega, co-founder of a company called Future Logistics. And ultimately, we exist to unlock trade across Africa, and we do so using effective, optimized supply chain through technology. It replicates a similar model that I built out my previous business, Go One. Simple thing is this: in Go One, we aggregated commoditized supply that was in courses and videos. In Future Logistics, we aggregate the commoditized supply that is trucking capacity across South Africa and into about 5 countries into Africa. We use tech to aggregate it the same way we do with Go One, and ultimately we own the customer. And so we typically work with multinationals, typically entering rest of Africa, but as well as in South Africa. I guess 2 fun facts about the business and then about myself. So we're probably the biggest mover of air conditioners in South Africa. And so when you're going through summer and you're feeling a bit cool, thank you to the good work that the guys have put in the team. And on the other side, in the last 2 years, we probably moved about 450,000 tons worth of stuff across South Africa and into rest of Africa as well, which was about 90,000 odd truckloads. I guess a fun fact or something someone doesn't know about myself is my current location. So I actually stepped out of my good friend's wedding in Uganda. And so hopefully I don't miss the I do, but otherwise I'm glad to be here.
Wow, thanks, Mal. Thanks, Mal. We appreciate it. And guys, I think one thing you need to understand is that we are incredibly proud of each one of these businesses. I think it's not just about for us getting money out the door. I know all the founders, and when you need money, like that's kind of driving you. You get that to get your growth going. But we're incredibly proud of what these businesses are doing. I know Prince gave some facts and some margins and what they're doing and how quickly they get money back. But ultimately, they're providing the lifeblood to spaza shops in the township economy. I mean, we all know load shedding. I don't have to say any more about Pele and what they're doing. And Velo, if you guys, honestly, if you need to go and want to learn coding, go and look at Zio. It's incredible. The platform is amazing. And I think what Mel's doing, I'll obviously let him, I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but what they're doing is literally making the cost of goods cheaper in Africa, where we already know that there's so many people who are under not just the bread line, but the poverty line. So yeah, we're really, really proud of these businesses. And so it's really is a privilege to have them on the panel with me today. So guys, I see we've just hit 30 minutes and I thought we were going to be a lot quicker through these things. So I'm going to just go to the next thing. I'd like you guys, the next questions will be directed probably at one of you, but this one is going to be for all of you. And I kind of just want you to give us a little bit of your personal journey with E Squared. Maybe think of like a pivotal moment. And then ultimately, I don't know, maybe if there was the good, you don't have to go into big details, but like maybe a moment that stood out for you. And then one thing that you didn't expect from E Squared and you were pleasantly surprised. And then secondly, just how this relationship has evolved over time. So let's start with, we just heard from Mal, so we'll start with Prince, and then you can nominate the next person to answer when you're done.
Why did you start with me, Brian?
Power.
Sure.
So I'll quickly just repeat your journey. Was there a specific moment that stood out to you?
Cool.
And then where you found that you were pleasantly surprised and how this relationship's evolved.
Okay. Cool. My journey with E Squared. Guys.
Okay, so we'll move over to Velo.
Yeah. No. All right. No, on a serious note, I think our investment round was quite a very interesting one. But I think I'll start off with saying the one thing that I can't take away from E Squared is they've been extremely supportive throughout the journey of raising capital. And I think that's one of the big benefits about partnering with them. They actually really, really care about trying to understand what is it that you actually do. And how do you actually create value? And how do you unlock value? And what does it look like? And at points in times, it might feel irritating because you're repeating the same thing many times over. But it's actually so good because it actually is ensuring that, one, they actually understand what they're putting capital into. But far more importantly, I think for me as an investee, it also gives me the comfort that these are people who genuinely care. They're not asking these questions because they didn't hear what I said the first time. They're asking this question again to make sure they actually truly understand. So that for me was super valuable. And I guess one of the big turning points or real key moments where I realized, okay, E Squared is gangster. In a good way, was really at a particular point in time where I think we were at this conference and I remember I was wilding. I'll say I was wilding. I remember we were meant to have a meeting, and I shot through an email, and because so long story short, it's a very nice antidote, but extra. So basically, we're meant to have a meeting on this day, but we're all at a conference. But then we agreed we're going to have a meeting, and I've been trying to raise capital for days, and then I get an email from E Squared, and they're like, nah, let's cancel this meeting. We'll meet at another day because everyone's at a conference. Do I not send an email being like, guys, my life is on the line. What games are you playing?
And we were there. We knew where each other were.
Yeah, and then they literally were like, okay, cool. We will miss the session. We'll come outside. We will have the call. We were all standing on a table outside of the conference. And we're trying to figure out how we get this investment round together. And that's just the level of commitment that's out there. And really, they did us a solid. I can't talk about our round, but they did us a solid. Amandla.
Thanks, Prince. Cool. Yeah, I do. I think the investment team are all laughing and nodding their heads because it was quite a... We all left there smiling and stuff, but it was a cool, memorable moment. So yeah, you can nominate next.
Actually, let's go for Melvin.
Okay, Mel, over to you. You remember the questions?
So, I do remember the question. I just wish now that I was at a conference and I called you guys outside. It would have been quite an epic memory, but...
At least he's smiling, guys. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is, Velo, do you want to go?
Yeah.
And then when Mel comes back,
I'll go for it. Yeah, so my journey with E Squared actually started as a candidate fellow. So there's something that they have now. It's called Founders Pitch, which, if you're a CF and you're watching, you should definitely put your hand up for that. So, it was the first iteration of it. There was a couple of things that they still needed to get right. So that was a full grant as well. So it was good to know that, there was E Squared to help us, at that stage to really validate our businesses and then, start going to market. I think one of the things that really surprised me when, I moved over pathways and then, getting in front of E2V, there was a team that was there, chatting to us about, how do we actually present this deal to IC? You don't find that, when speaking to other VCs, you basically have to be ready. If your deal even goes to IC, you need to know everything. So we obviously spoke to Gladwin, Sean, Tamal, and Brian, and they helped us figure it out. They explained all the tools, all the different avenues that we could explore, which, for me was unheard of. So I think that was probably the best experience that I then had with E Squared.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and that was I think we all enjoyed that journey with you too. So thank you. Adila, I see Melvin's not on yet, so maybe you want to go for it.
So I think there's a very key pivotal moment that I'm sure Gladwin remembers very well. The deal with E Squared took a lot of time. It was new initially to E Squared. It was new to myself to think about buying into an existing business. And then there was a series of other stakeholders being the existing founders of the business. And so there were so many phases to this transaction. So we were about, I want to say 2 or 3 years in to still getting it together. And it was the end of last year, actually, and it had been an exhausting year. Everyone in this room knows about the grind, apart from trying to do something like buying into a business. And I burnt out spectacularly. And everything was kind of teed up. And we were ready to close. Sean was working around the clock. Gladwin was working around the clock. We had lawyers, everyone involved. And I nervously invited Gladwin to coffee at Tasha's to say, gee, I actually can't. Right now, I need to take some time. And his organization's response to that, for me as a human, not the deal, not the money that we could lose, not anybody else and all the noise, was just something else. To the point where I took the time off. We had quite a lot of deadlines, but to come off burnout and reevaluating and reassessing your life, and you'll find to turn around and say, hey, are you ready? And to feel ready, I think that just really shows the level of personal and human support, and that's beyond pivotal, really.
Thank you, Adila. I think it really is a special journey I think we've been on. And it was a moment, I think, where it was not something that we got concerned or anything. We actually just were like, okay, guys, how do we do this, right? how can we really just throw our support behind her. So yeah, it was an amazing moment, and thanks, Glads. I think you were so big part of that. So Mel, I see you back. You wanna take us away?
Yeah, and and literally picking up off Adila's point, I think around personalized provision. So I was just mentioning earlier how initially when I approached eSquared, I was like, look, I want pure equity. I want to raise money for a particular vehicle. But I think what eSquared and the investment team did very well was actually help me understand not only the business that I was building, but more importantly, why I need the capital. And so I've never raised debt capital in my life. Historically, the previous business, we raised equity about $450 million, but never raised debt. And so just being able to have that frank conversation around like, do you really need that much equity? Can you use debt? And even go beyond that, where, we got term sheets some of the biggest banks in South Africa, and having the eSquared investment team actually help spar and get better terms was something which I didn't know I needed until I realized how egregious the first term sheets were that we got. And so it's almost beyond understanding the business, but also understanding why we need the capital. And I think to your point, Adela, going above and beyond just what's expected.
That's right. Awesome. Thanks, Mel. I also I've to my fellow hosts in the panel here, I've had the same thing happen. My time's gone. So we have 5 minutes, 56 seconds. We're going to have to rush through this now. So Prince, just very briefly, can you just maybe, one thing we like to do is obviously have an alignment with our businesses and the impact that we're trying to derive and affect. So can you maybe just talk us through the sort of impact and alignment with what you're doing and how eSquared has supported you through that?
Yeah, so I mean, like obviously we're deploying capital into an environment where the next best option is a loan shark. And the reality of the matter is we've got a 99.6% repayment rate. So it's not the fact that traders in this space can't be backed by traditional financial institutions, it's just that they don't know how to be. And traditional finance isn't willing to come into the space. And to have a player like eSquared not only provide the capital to enable us to consistently lend into this environment that's actually risking their own capital, but also enabling us to work with other financial services players and to try crowd in capital in innovative ways has also been super impactful. For us, it's obviously building resilience within those sorts of environments, enabling individuals to continue to grow and scale their businesses. There are people that we funded who started with one spaza shop and now have 3. There are guys who we started out funding at 40,000, now they're taking 200,000 Rand every second week and repaying that consistently. And it just goes to show that that would not have been possible if you didn't have an investor who didn't look beyond what the norm is. So that we're super grateful for that.
Awesome, thanks, Prince. So Adila, in terms of eSquared's patient long-term investment approach, similar question to what I just posed to Prince, how have you found that has actually impacted and enabled us to support you?
So, I mean, the entire premise of the business I'm in is long-term. We're talking about 20-year returns, which is awesome, but also requires someone to be really patient in the initial phases. So I think just to short and sweet, eSquared's very support and investment into this business shows that they are really willing to wait it out. There's a super long horizon on our return, but we're clearly bedded down and here for the day-to-day until we actually start to realize the value.
Yeah, that's right. I think there might be people's children in here when we're done with the deal. No, I'm kidding, guys. All right, Mel. So there's the two sort of more topics I want to get on just before we finish, to give everyone who hasn't applied for funding, who hasn't come through the whole process with us, is just, Mel, can you maybe just talk to your engagement with the investment team and just sort of give us a little bit of color around that?
Yeah, and I think it's been, and so investors from, SoftBank, Microsoft, Salesforce, and others. And I think definitely the key difference between the eSquared investment team, and I think all commensurate professionals, I think is they're on your side from the beginning. And that's something which is, and it's something which you take for granted, because often an investor is friendly to get the deal and then will try to squeeze you out on terms and beat you down a bit to get better terms. I've seen this happen enough times. But literally from the first engagement, from, me reaching out and saying like, look guys, I'm building this business. I would like to acquire another business in the process and expand, and I'd like to raise capital. Just the partnership from day one, as opposed to let's see, and if we like it, we'll go forward, I think for me was a key one. And so from the first engagement to actually sharing. So for example, sharing what I want to build, meeting my partners in the business, meeting co-investors, engaging with the banks, even right through to the point where we were negotiating the final terms of the agreement. I always felt like I had someone on the same side as me, as opposed to negotiating against someone. And I think what was really telling was, so like any investment process, there's an IC, and many of you will know many faces on the IC. But I think just the questions that are asked and the support given by the investment team shows, and I think to the point, Prince, you mentioned earlier, the depth of understanding that not only the investment team, but even the IC took to understand the business. And we're not really asking questions to catch you out, but to help you think through what sustainable business looks like and what is attainable given what you're building. And so for me, whilst we can go through the details of like what the investment process has been step by step, I think for those who've raised capital, looking to raise capital, it's very different because of from day one, they're on your side.
Yeah, thanks, Mal. I think that that's something we definitely pride ourselves on, and it sometimes takes a little while to get across that actually, guys, we're trying to put together something here that's ultimately going to benefit you and got your best interests at heart. So that kind of leads then nicely into Mvelo around the IC and that experience. Maybe just something that kind of resonated with you through that process, actually being and talking to the IC.
Yeah. So just for context, we recently went through IC. We spent months preparing for it, and as Malvin was saying, they were there from day one, so that when we went there, we were already confident in what we're actually presenting. But at IC, the IC team was engaged. They were even asking us about how we think about our business long term. Have we considered this avenue? One of the biggest things that we really want to solve for is jobs on the continent. And that was something that came through in IC. It's like, how do we then feed what we're doing around training and education into that whole idea of creating jobs across the continent? I think maybe one other thing that I really liked about the session or the IC actual day was the fact that there were other stakeholders in the rest of the community that were on the call. So there were people from philanthropy, people that are in the programs at Orbos Foundation that were there to support you, that were there to really hear how is your investment going, or how is your session with IC going. So I think that was just a reminder about the community that really exists within E Squared, within Allen Gray, etc. So it was really good to see that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Mvelo. And guys, just so you know, if we also look like we're trying to talk really quick, there's a red screen that says time's up, exclamation mark. Press Del to reset, escape to exit. Too much information, but okay. So guys, I think just before we end, there were some other questions, but I think you guys, thank you for your openness and honesty in that. I think it hopefully has provided you, everyone here in the audience, with a bit of a flavor and a feel about E Squared and fundraising with E Squared. Mm-hmm. So, normally I'm asking the questions and everyone here has to answer. So I thought I'm going to flip it over to end this. And I would like to actually, having worked with each one of you on the respective deals, just last parting thing from my side as a dealer, one thing we really appreciated was the trust you placed in the E Squared investment team and in the E Squared at the pivotal time for you personally and with Pele. So the honesty you conveyed about your fears, concerns, ambitions was truly refreshing. So thank you, Adila. Guys, let's give Adila a round of applause. Okay, so next, not in order of seating, I wrote this out before I knew how everyone would be seated. So Mvelo, your openness to hear our suggestions around the funding strategy really resonated with the team. It was a process that we had to walk together. So trust again comes to mind. So thank you for sticking out and trusting us with your business. So guys, please give Mvelo a round of applause. All right. And then Prince, the one thing that was echoed by the investment team over and over was your and Kanye's partnership approach and being willing to listen despite the immense pressure from the potential funding partners that you were engaging with. So we really appreciated the frank feedback and the good and the bad. So thank you very much, Prince.
Amandala.
Come on, Prince, you can do it better than that. All right, cool. Then Mal, again, thanks for taking the time out at the wedding. We've had and continue to have quite an arduous process with multiple stakeholders who are all driven by different motivations. We really appreciate the humility you've shown through the process, despite having multiple other avenues to achieve your goals. So the word partner again comes to mind, and we're definitely proud to have the opportunity to partner with you. So thank you so much, Mal. Guys, please give Mal an awesome big round of applause. And thank you very much for your... Oh, there's... Yes.
Can we have the two of them share their experience? Because I think it'd be very valuable for some of the early stage founders that are in the room and how that journey can come to pass into getting into E2V. I think it's very important.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, what Sipos Pelele and the rest of the team have put together in Pathways is actually really special. I mean, there's multiple programs that are out there where, I was just speaking to one of the fellows now, where every week it's a topic that you have to go through. With Pathways, you create your own program. So that in and of itself is really special. I think the support as well that exists in the Pathways part of E2 is really good. The personal relationship that I built also with Spelele during that time was really, really special. So I'd really advocate for anyone, whether you have an idea, whether it's something that you've already started and you have a couple of customers and you have revenue, definitely go for it. There's something for you. There's like 3 different phases that you can go through, and you'll definitely fit somewhere.
I think from my side, one of the big things for us was just like, guys, I don't think we understand how backed we are by Alan Gray and E2. Like it's truly special. From the Pathways program, for us, obviously we came in with an idea, quite frankly, and like I mentioned, the inventory I sell is money, and the Pathways cash is not sufficient to be able to even try and pilot the idea. So what does E2 go out and do? They start thinking, so it was around the time when like there was COVID drama, etc., and obviously everyone had to do their own contribution in terms of like being responsible corporate citizens. And what happened was, I think Cheryl, within the broader E2 community, played a role of helping us to unlock funding through an NGO that they were going to invest in. And then that gave us, so that NGO had to give us the money to manage, so we can lend out to spaza stores initially. And that was like 2.6 million rand. That was just to test our idea. There was 0 track record. And off the back of that, we then proved out the model and didn't lose money and consistently did that. And that created the pathway for us to be able to go and raise more significant amounts of capital. So I guess the point of it is, I think if there's any message that should resonate with each and every single fellow, E2 backs you. They believe in you deeply, but you need to also bring yourself to the party.
Thanks, Prince. I think, it's really, it's a really proud moment when you sit up here and you hear from the people that you've actually backed and worked with, when they say these things, and we haven't paid them in cash, really cash the business. So guys, thank you very much for your openness, your willingness to sit on the stage here today and talk about your experience. We really appreciate the being here, and also we appreciate you guys. So thanks very much for sharing the stage with me today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I told you Sean was funny, but we've reached the end of our seminar. So thank you everybody for attending. We're now going to go into the second leg of today, which is the startup founder pitch, where we'll be having some entrepreneurs and fellows that will be pitching their businesses for the SFP program. And that will be starting at 4 o'clock. So we'll be having a break now until then, 7-minute break until 4. And then we'll reconvene for the startup founder pitch. To the fellows that are going to be pitching, can you please just come forward to the AV team over here? And then we will then proceed at 4 o'clock. Thank you. Oh, 4:15. 4:15, sorry about that. Oh, yes.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please settle down? I know we are reaching a very exciting time in the program and that everybody is very excited, but it would be lovely to see more people sitting down. Fantastic. I'm going to continue now. At the back, can we please, ladies and gentlemen, outside, may we please come back into the room? All right, so I'm going to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please take our seats at this point in juncture? We will be going into the next part of the program, which is the Startup Founder Pitch. I'm going to call up Mr. Sipho to explain. Guys at the back, can we please settle down just a bit? We know that it's a very exciting moment. Things are flowing, things are free, but comrades, can we please just come back to and remember why we are here? Thank you very much. We have entered into the time of the program where we're going to start with the Startup Founder Pitch, and I'm going to introduce on stage my leader, Sipho, who's going to take us through what the Startup Founder Pitch is all about. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Just gonna give a couple of seconds just for people to just settle down. Yeah? Have we not had a great time together so far? I'm pretty stoked. There's reams and reams of notes, and there's a whole bunch of things going through my head. But we're going to shift gears now. As has been introduced, we're gonna go into a pitch. So I just want to introduce myself to those maybe who don't know me, and a little bit about this pitch, because we know that we've got people who maybe are engaging with E-Squared for the first time, or maybe second or third, but haven't come across this. So I'm Sipho, and I head up. I'm not a, I'm saying. But yeah, I'm Sipho, and I head up part of our business, which is really around how we work together with fellows, right? To actually start to build businesses that are built on strong fundamentals, and hopefully we can get them to grow and to become, funding ready. So that department is called Search and Pipeline Programs, and in that department we have three programs really. The one Velo mentioned it, or two Velo mentioned them when he was on stage. Fellowship Founders Pitch, that's for all the candidate fellows in the room. That's essentially a grant that we try to help you to sort of like just get going with your ideas, right? Then we've got Pathways, and Pathways is quite hands-on. It's been a program that we piloted in 2020, April, and it really has surpassed our expectations in terms of just what we've been able to see through it, and as evidenced by some of the fellow founders that you saw earlier that have now gone through our main investment program. But now, Startup Founder Pitch. Startup Founder Pitch is really a low-touch, as opposed to Pathways, low-touch program. It's curated specifically for fellows who have started some sort of like businesses. Most of the time, these are side hustles alongside full-time work. And in terms of what it's about really getting a lot of advice around how to think through their build from this point, and I'll come to how that comes through. And then they are also able to receive a standard amount of 200,000 rand, which can increase to 450 altogether, because there's a 250 matching fund that's associated with it. So if they're able to raise funds from others, or they're able to introduce own funds, we're able to match to the max of 250. About this program, it's something that we think it's more for that fellow who's really kind of like doesn't have the capacity to do a pathway type thing, but and we introduced it last year. We've actually done, will be the third of these sessions. We did the first one in September 2022. 14 businesses pitched, 7 received awards. Of those 7, 5 have since come through for further support, having really shown a lot of traction, and we're still tracking another 2, which probably come in there. So it's been incredibly successful. And today we've got 7 businesses that will be pitching. And I think that you're going to find with them that there is an opportunity really to get support, even at quite early stages in your ventures. I'd really want to just really welcome and thank the panel of adjudicators that we've got. We've got, in no particular order, but in a particular order that's going to leave the male part last. There is my sister, Amina Patterson from Solve for X. She is with us for the 3rd. She's basically been with us since the beginning of this thing. So thank you very much for making time again for us. Amina, we really, really appreciate your support. Also, someone who doesn't have any, who needs no introduction to the actual, startup founder pitch is Okela Nsamai of Okela and Associates. So thank you very much also, Okela, for always availing yourself and really for the passion that you have for the startup space. And then there is my recently, I think more recently established brother, Matthew. Matthew Marston runs Startup Club ZA. Guys, if you don't know about that platform, get to know that platform. It's an amazing, amazing platform that brings investors and founders and corporates, and just, you can really make some meaningful engagements in that platform. So thank you so much, Matt, for your first rodeo with us. We hope it won't be your last. But yeah, I think that the excitement really is not about what I'm saying here. We're really just excited to see that there's opportunities and more opportunities that we can give to fellows at different stages in their journeys. Guys, how's everyone feeling? Amazing, amazing, amazing. I must just say that, we had to work a bit agile, and you guys will have seen some dates kind of like changing and as we're trying to see when best and how best to accommodate this pitch. But I think it's brilliant that we actually had it at seminar, because I think that it talks to kind of like crystallizing what it looks like. And I'm hoping that in the audience, if there's a fellow, in fact, I know there's Mta there who's a candidate fellow who had applied for this pitch here, but we obviously are saying, well, look, we'll have to look at you in the next year, but please come through. But to have this experience and actually see what goes on, I think that there's nothing that you can that can compare to this. So my task is to do 2 things. One is to sort of like round us up on this pitch event and give you a little bit about the next steps there. And then the next thing that I need to do is to really just do a closing and vote of thanks just for the day in its entirety. So let's start with startup founder pitch. I think that I kind of like rushed through very important points at the beginning when I talked a little bit about this. And that was because I wanted to make sure that we gave enough time to the actual pitch. But today, we've just completed 30 of these startup founder pitches. And I find it incredible that without even counting these 7 that pitched today, we've already got 7 very good opportunities out of 23, basically, that we are working on further than what we did at the pitches that preceded. It just shows you, firstly, the amount of potential that sits within our community, entrepreneurially and impact-wise, because that's what we are all called to. And secondly, I think it just shows how thinking through things differently is the only way really to get to somewhere. I'll admit I was one of those who was a little bit stuck on like, we just started Pathways. Is this the right time to introduce this? But here we are, and I am so happy to have been wrong. Let's put it like that. But I just want to say, the first and clear, appreciation has to go to all of the fellows who pitched today. I don't know about you, but this was for me quite next level. So I take my hat off to you. So please, a round of applause to all. And there's a lot of grace that came with that, because there were late night kind of like emails and calls and putting things together and all that stuff. We got three fellows, Sufyan, Cheryl, and Tamara, who flew in this morning from Cape Town. The energy level that they showed on stage is not diminished. You can kind of like see where all that is. But so really, I appreciate. I know it's not easy to stand in front of people and do what you did. But yeah, for the next steps in terms of this, typically in such events, you have this whole thing where we now start to go through and start to talk about what are the awards that so-and-so is getting and all that stuff. We will make sure to announce it to everyone and make a big thing around that, but we're not going to do that today. What's going to happen is that the panel is going to basically just think through some of the conversations that took place and that. And in the week, we will reconcile with them. And our undertaking to the participants is to say that we will contact you by Friday coming, giving you the confirmation of the outcome of your pitch, and then we will communicate to the community only after that point. I hope that sits well with everyone. But that's really how we've done things with Startup Funder Pitch. And I think it's a good thing, because what then you get is not just the outcome, but you also get the advices that comes with that. Say, these are some of the things that came out that probably you should work on as you move forward with your venture. So really, again, thank you so much, guys, for everything, for the pitches. Now I'm going to shift my attention to the day. Wow, our seminar is a very, very important event, and to see the turnout that we received today, I know some people have had to leave, and that's perfectly understandable. But to see the turnout that we received, I think for us, it's communicating this thing. Last year we had a theme. It was about what? Who remembers? Who was there last year? It's that time of the day. But yeah, it was about building trust. It was about building trust specifically between the community, that is the fellows. You guys are at the forefront of all the impact that we're set out to do. Without your effort, without your energy, without your passion, and without even you guys coming back to say these things don't work for us properly, we could never achieve anything. We might as well not have been created then. So it's very important, and I really appreciate the fact that there is such a step change in at least in our view, in seeing things and how we're starting to relate with each other. And I think that it also comes through in the kind of conversations that we're having. And I think that there's a lot that came out today. We had a whole view around the macro space, around what's happening in the investment space, where are the capital funds going, what are we seeing in terms of support for ventures and for investors and the like. We started to think about how should we rethink the way that E Squared should be approaching things? How should we rethink the way that all of us as a community should be approaching things? And we owe a lot to David Saunders from Brighter Bridges and Anthony Catt from London Africa Network and Ventures 54. I really think that there was such richness, and I think it was a good foundation for what then came through afterwards. And then I think, I just want to also just thank the partners who were also with us in the following discussion. We had Nivesh from Noscan 22, we had Bakang from E4E Africa, We had Matthew from Future Africa and Lumka from the SME Fund. And I think we had a conversation that was talking about, in as much as we've been endowed with such resources and such an opportunity and such a privilege to do what we do, we will not do it alone. Fellows, we are empowered. We're giving so much to us to be agents of change, but an agent only works in a system where there are other people that are being catalyzed, there are other people that are being brought forward. So I really think that we see ourselves sitting with partners here that we probably need to do more with and work with more, and we are starting to do those things. So we're really grateful for that conversation around optimizing the investment ecosystem. And then there was a very important conversation, and I felt so bad that we had to sort of like cut it a little bit short. The conversation, very, very important and critical conversation around prioritizing women-focused funding. And I'm not going to regurgitate it, but the reason that we are committed to this thing here around really focusing on female entrepreneurship and investing into those entities, that data generally doesn't lie. It gives you the things. And we know that the data is clear about what do you get when you invest into female-founded enterprises. That's not to say that we stop we stop funding, the male teams, but there is certainly something wrong when you talk about 2% of funds being channeled to female founders. There's something very, very wrong. And I think that we as an organization, we just want you as fellows to understand that this is something that we take to heart, and this is something that we haven't figured out. This is conversations that are supposed to help us to sort of like, start to get some of those ideas and start to understand. I would like to understand, for instance, when you're on pathways and you're going through different phases of your life, as a female, maybe you're now a new mom and all those things. What are some of the things that we should be thinking about? How should we be thinking about how we work things around? So it's really about saying we are committed to this. We have been looking into gender lens, investing. We haven't quite fully nailed it, but we are committed and we've taken steps to say these are some of the things. So I really want to just thank, that panel there with, led by Onkgopotse, and also our partners, Nadia from Hub, Melanie from SAFCA. I know that there was technical challenges with her and stuff, but also for our investee as well. Onks is another investee of ours, but in Dineo as well, in giving us those insights, because these are the data points that we need. It's not conversation for the sake of conversation. It's not seminar for the sake of seminar. It's say, what are we going to take and how are we going to go back and think through things? And I'm so glad now we've got a good body in the fellow council to really work through some of these things. And then we did also obviously have that last panel that had all the investees that were here, with Sean leading that conversation. I mean, I think that we started to get a sense when Velo talks about. I started engaging and being invested into by eSquared when I was still a candidate fellow. It starts to show you the continuum that we are able to play. And one is seeing it in all the things that we're doing, that there is a good sort of like throughput that is coming through from all different spaces. But we understand this also. We understand that you guys are connected much further than we can be connected with the fellow community. And there are some fellows who are not yet at the level of engagement, perhaps that you are. We're not going to get our voice there as easily, but we're going to ask you to partner with us. Because one thing I can tell you, every single person at eSquared, when they wake up in the morning, they're really waking up to try to show up in a way that is as helpful as possible to all of you. So with that kind of like overview of the day, I just want to really give some thanks to key people that really helped us to have this event happen. So firstly, I want to commend the stakeholder engagement and communications team. Audrey, and it's a team of two. It's a team of two. I mean, yes, people chip in, people, can maybe say, I will help with this and this and that, but we're all running. So literally, again, I would like to say this. Audrey, Mo, please, if you can please just stand. We just want to give you. Thank you so much for creating an environment that allowed us to engage in this way. Some of these things, some of us, we don't see it, but the way that you set up everything is such that we could have conversations that were really, really meaningful. So thank you so much for that. Really want to thank our friends from BT Pro, Byron and team. Guys, you're part of the family now, and we really thank you for always giving us the quality experience for us to be able to do these things, so that even those who are not able to be here are able to still experience, the quality of what we're trying to do here. We also would not have been able to do this without the team, from 9% the team from Lumamu. I just want to say that that's another relationship that is just growing in leaps and bounds, and we just love the fact that there is an understanding of who we are and what we're trying to do. So thank you so much for that. I know that there's so many people who would have also liked to be here from our board, and we know that they will be accessing these recordings, and that a number of them have sent their apologies. So we just wish to convey their apologies to you as well. But I want to thank Gladwin, our CEO. Thank you so much for helping to shape, the discussions and the discussion points and some of the things that that I think are important for us to achieve alignment with the fellows who are, like I said, are the actual drivers of the change that we want to see. And thank you so much to all of the E-Squared team, from the executive of E-Squared, the management and team. Really, guys, thank you so much for coming through. But most of all, it is for you, the fellow community. So for all the fellows in the room, candidate fellows, take a bow. Thank you very much. We now come. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna pay. I'm so gonna pay. I'm so gonna pay. What can I say? Matt, Amina, Okela. I mean, you guys, you understand what we're trying to do. For those who don't really know a lot, but just to take one example, Amina knows exactly what this whole thing is about. She's walked the journey of a fellow, so she understands what this thing was created to do, and she's doing her work in this space here. And it's just such a privilege to be able to partner with people like you, and sometimes at short notice, because things have not necessarily worked out the way that we wanted. We changed this date about 3 times or so, but thank you so much for your generosity and for your kindness and for all the advice and the time that you have taken out, Matt, I don't know what's gonna happen, because if I was moving and I left someone with boxes, I don't know how I was gonna talk through that, but you are a better man than me, so thank you so much, guys. Really, really appreciate you. Guys, I think I've stayed a little bit too long up here. Just to say, please, 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 I know that a lot of you have given up a lot to be here, but if you can spend a little bit of time with us, it would really be great just to connect a bit. The judges, a number of them are going to be leaving soon, but especially for those people that pitched, it might be a good thing to just potentially just have a little bit of conversation. Don't worry, they're ethical. So it's not about brown envelopes. It's about just connecting and stuff, yeah? Guys, thank you so much. I'm not a good person to leave the mic with, so let me stop before I start talking about Arsenal and stuff. Cheers, guys.